Sil endured 2 assaults, leaving a letter that led my brother to disown his daughter. I raised her, but now he demands her house. To begin with, my sister-in-law Zara was a very kind and generous person. She always greeted me with love and made me feel like I was a sister from the first time I met her. We had grown really close over the years because we were both working women, and we would spend our weekends shopping or going to lunch together. Zara was always incredibly fit and took excellent care of her health. This is why the sad news of her breast cancer diagnosis shocked us all so deeply. We united behind her and supported her fight against cancer. I made it a point to visit her frequently during her chemotherapy rounds to spend time with her and watch over my infant niece whenever possible. During one of my visits to her home, while we sat together in her living room, she told me some news that broke my heart. Her voice trembled as she stated that her physicians had delivered a devastating diagnosis. Her cancer was severe and resistant to therapy. They'd given her a prognosis that left little room for optimism. The weight of her comments weighed heavily in the air, and I fought to find the perfect words to console her during that vulnerable moment. I asked her what I could do to make everything easy for her. Her eyes, which were typically filled with love and joy, suddenly showed a mixture of fear and resignation. She thanked me for everything I had done for her and expressed her desire not to burden me with a secret she had kept concealed from everyone. I strongly stated that she had nothing to apologize for and that I would do anything for her, no questions asked. She then entrusted me with a secret she had never told anyone, including her own parents. She told me that years ago, during her undergraduate days, she went through a horrible experience that has haunted her ever since. She was the victim of a sexual attack at a party, where she had been drinking too much. The attacker wore a mask, making it impossible for her to recognize him. The horror of that night left severe scars that she had been carrying silently for years. As she described the events of that fatal evening, I listened in terror. She was then in a relationship with my brother. Naturally, she looked to him for help and consolation, expecting that he would be the one person in the world who understood her. Instead of finding relief in his embrace, she was confronted with astonishment and accusations. My brother couldn't understand how another man could violate her in this way. In disbelief, he began to question her actions, indicating that perhaps her clothes or demeanor toward the guy at the party had prompted the assault. He refused to think that a man could accomplish such a thing unless the lady gave him a signal. Zara was heartbroken that he was questioning her in this manner. The weight of shame and guilt, wrongfully imposed on her by someone she loved, exacerbated her pain. Despite this, she summoned the bravery to denounce the assault to the police and even underwent a medical examination, which confirmed her claim about the assault. She wanted the culprit punished. Unfortunately for Zara, she lived in a college neighborhood where parties were prevalent and thousands of students congregated under the cover of night. Despite their best efforts, the authorities were unable to identify the masked assailant. It didn't help that none of the guests at the party came forward to testify for her. As a result, the inquiry stalled, and Zara never received justice. At the time, her parents were still living and the only ones who believed in her. This is how she overcame her great humiliation for what had occurred to her. According to Zara, after months of discussing the incident with my brother, he finally came around and apologized for his initial reaction. He realized that he should have known better and pledged to be more supportive of her going forward. Despite the strain on their relationship, Zara did not want to break it with him, so she chose to forgive him. Despite my brother's best efforts to be there for her in the years that followed, the tragedy never left her mind. I was saddened to hear this, especially since my brother had never mentioned any of it to me. Sil pointed out that my brother disliked discussing it and had even told her to keep the occurrence a secret, as if it were something disgusting for others to discover. I gently gripped Sil's hand and assured her that I didn't blame her for anything that had happened to her because it was never her fault. Sil smiled back bitterly and told me she had more to say. She talked slowly, as if each word was both a confession and a request for understanding. She then disclosed that she had been sexually attacked again after the initial event, this time by her former employer from her prior position. I remembered how, 2 or 3 years ago, she unexpectedly left her work, despite the fact that she had always enjoyed it. Sil had never told me why until now. Her hands trembled as she described how terrified and helpless she felt during the second assault. She informed me she was numb from shock during the event and could only move after the assault finished. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she departed the scene in a daze, her entire body trembling with the weight of what had just occurred. She recounted feeling detached from everything, as if she were witnessing the trauma from outside her own body. Later, as she sat in her car crying, her first thoughts drifted to my brother. She knew based on his earlier reaction that he would likely blame her again. She described how she felt the same shame when she realized she had been abused by another man without her consent. She felt unclean and repulsed by herself. This time, the trauma had a greater impact on her mental health since, Unlike previously, she had no one to talk to. Her parents had died, and she was afraid to open out to my brother. As a result, she fell into melancholy and experienced a few panic attacks. Sil told me she debated whether to report the assault to the police and have her boss arrested, or to safeguard her marriage. Then, 3 weeks later, she learned she was pregnant. At that point, she was positive that the child was not my brother's. The weight of this realization devastated her even more, and she was unsure how to convey the news to my brother. She assumed he would ask for a divorce. As her mental health deteriorated, Sil decided to end her life. She told me how powerless she felt at the time, lacking the strength to end the pregnancy and not wanting others to know about the assaults. I listened to her story, holding back tears, unable to understand what she had been through silently, without any of us knowing. Sil went on to tell me how, the evening she decided to end her life with sleeping pills, everything changed. My brother unexpectedly discovered the positive pregnancy test in the restroom. Instead of waiting for an explanation, he began bouncing up and down, overjoyed that she was pregnant and that they could finally start a family together. Caught up in his joy and engulfed in his embrace, she found herself unable to bring him down with the truth. Later, she told me how humiliated she was for not having the strength to tell him the truth that day or over the course of the previous 2 years, that the child was not his. Sil informed me that every time she saw the delicate moments between her daughter and my brother, her heart broke again. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she apologized to me for lying to my brother and everyone else. She even referred to herself as a coward and a loser who did not deserve a family as great as ours. She believed that cancer was God's punishment for her falsehoods. She informed me she intended to disclose everything to my brother before she died. However, she asked me to make her a pledge. It turns out she wanted me to look after her daughter while she was gone. She pleaded with me with her hands since she had no family members left, both her parents and grandparents had passed away. If my brother refused to accept the child after learning the truth, I was her only hope of caring for her daughter. I was quite shaken after hearing everything and needed some time to comprehend it all. As a woman myself, I felt profound sympathy for everything she had been through. I knew she was telling me the whole truth because she was dying and needed to get it off her chest. Of course, I realized that she had lied to my brother for so long about being the baby's father, but she was also visibly sorry. At this moment, all I could do was reassure her that if necessary, I would raise my niece on my own. She exhaled a sigh of relief as I fulfilled my promise to her. I continued to see Sil over the weeks as her illness advanced, holding out hope for her survival even as the reality of her condition became more apparent. She remained as courageous as possible throughout. Finally, she went away peacefully in her sleep. Her absence has created a void, yet her spirit continues to motivate me to live with compassion and gratitude. She showed me that even in the worst times, there can be grace and beauty if we have the strength to perceive it. She was more than just a sister-in-law to me. She was a friend and sincere confidant. After she died, my brother shared with me the contents of a letter written by my sister-in-law, which revealed the awful reality she had previously confided in me. He was heartbroken to realize that the child he had embraced with such delight was not biologically his. His anguish and rage were obvious as he dealt with this new reality, which was exacerbated by the recent death of his wife. In his grief, he couldn't bring himself to hold the infant anymore. Instead, he told our parents and me that he was going to give her up. I firmly told him that Sil had asked me to look after my niece, and that I wanted to take care of her even if he no longer wanted her. This is how I welcomed my niece into my home without hesitation. I was really heartbroken for her because she had just lost her mother, and with no other family left, her parents and grandparents had passed away. I knew she needed a stable and supportive atmosphere at the moment. Later, when we gathered for the reading of my sister-in-law's will, everyone was already emotional because they knew my niece did not belong to my brother. Many of my family members were divided over this news. However, Sil was no longer with us to face their fury. According to her will, she made specific and careful plans for her daughter's future, leaving every asset and resource she had amassed over the years for her daughter's benefit. Sil had a large fortune from both her parents and grandparents, so she had a lot of money to leave behind. To my brother's sorrow, nothing was allocated to him, exacerbating his pain and sense of betrayal. He yelled loudly that it was wrong of her not to leave anything in her will for him. Sil had specifically stated that she had committed the management of these monies to me provided I was willing to take on the responsibility of caring for her kid. This news surprised both me and everyone else present. I suppose this is why Sil wanted me to make that pledge to her weeks before she died, so she could update her will accordingly. She was correct to believe her intuition and not allow my brother access to her assets, since if that had been the case, he would never have let my niece have anything and would have abandoned her without money. My brother was unwilling to continue caring for the child, therefore I was eventually granted full custody of my niece. I've been able to care for her all these years because of the financial support I received. My brother attempted to battle me over the money Sil had left behind, believing he was entitled to at least half of it. However, the judge did not listen to him. In rage, my brother told me that he didn't want anything to do with Sil's daughter and that he never wanted to see my face again, saying that I had betrayed him by taking in the girl. I firmly told him that I was sorry for all of his sorrow, but I was not going to break my promise to Sil. My sister-in-law's decision to keep the facts from my brother was wrong, and I acknowledged that. However, now that she is no longer with us, I am convinced that the child is not to blame for her parents' conduct. This is why I've always focused only on establishing a caring and secure home for my niece, sheltering her from the intricacies of the past. Over the years, I've used the funds Sil left behind to ensure that my niece has everything she needs. I've also purchased a home for her, which my niece will entirely inherit once she reaches adulthood. I've made every effort to send her to great schools and care for her as if she were my own daughter. I am not married and have dedicated my entire life to raising my niece. Despite my best attempts, my niece, understandably, has concerns about her parents, especially her father. She misses my brother, but she understands that relationships cannot be forced in these circumstances. My decision to prioritize my niece's well-being has affected my ties with my other family members. They have all chosen to cut ties with me and no longer invite me to family gatherings, claiming that my actions are foolish and that I have prioritized my niece over my own. Even my parents believe I should have given up my niece and have often expressed their disappointment that I am raising someone else's child. As you might expect, the past several years have been a challenging journey in which I've had to negotiate the chasm between what I believe is right and the ramifications of those decisions on my family connections. This year, as my niece approaches her 18th birthday, I feel a sense of accomplishment as I prepare to transfer all of her assets, including the property I've acquired for her per Sil's desires. It's a significant achievement for which I've worked hard. I feel like I've done everything I could to protect her up until now, and she's ready to make her own decisions. My brother contacted me unexpectedly last week, saying he needed to discuss something very serious. My heart skipped a beat. I hoped he'd realized his mistake and wanted to reconnect with me and my niece after all these years. I agreed to meet with him, but I didn't want my niece to find out and get her hopes up until I knew why he was visiting. So I planned for us to meet when she was at school. When my brother came, there was a sense of expectation and warmth as we made small chat. He told me he has since remarried, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn that he now has 2 children of his own. He showed me images of them, and his boys looked exactly like him. I was disappointed that he hadn't invited me to his wedding, but I understood that he did what he had to do after Sil had deceived him. During our talk, I couldn't help but feel proud as I highlighted my niece's accomplishments and improvement over the years. I informed my brother that she occasionally inquired about him and was fairly mature for her age, thinking he would say he wanted to see her. Despite my excitement to communicate these wonderful tidings, he appeared indifferent to my niece. He interrupted me, his tone immediately changing to one of seriousness. He explained that he had come to meet me not to discuss my niece, but to request ownership of her house. I stared at him wide-eyed as he told how his family had suddenly lost their home and that our parents had already loaned him a large sum of money over the years, so he could no longer ask for assistance. Since he knew I had purchased the house with Sil's money, he believed it was only fair for me and my niece to let him keep the house to accommodate his large family while we relocated to a smaller space. I questioned him why he thought he could even pose such a question. My brother went on to defend it by claiming that he had previously done a lot for Sil, but she had turned out to be nothing more than a leech. I knew this wasn't true because Sil had always worked and paid her portion of the bills, including throughout her chemotherapy treatments. She covered her own medical expenses and had health insurance. I brought this out to my brother, telling him that it was ridiculous for him to expect a house when he hadn't even bothered raising my niece after Sil died. This simply made him angrier. He told me that, as his sister, I should stop holding a candle for a deceased woman and instead assist him and his family in securing the house before my niece turned 18. He persuaded me to view things his way, saying that the house was his legitimate possession. The weight of his words hung in the air as I considered his request. I couldn't help but consider the ramifications of such a decision. The property was more than simply a physical asset. It symbolized security and stability, which had been meticulously planned for my niece's future. To give it up, no matter how badly my brother needed it, would mean breaking commitments and risking the stability I had fought so hard to establish. My niece's well-being and future were paramount, and any decision involving her assets had to be made with her best interests in mind, no matter how difficult or emotional the situation. In that moment, I grasped the gravity of the situation and the need to stick to my beliefs. I informed him unequivocally that I could not support his request and that he should take responsibility for his own family rather than relying on his deceased wife's possessions. I continued to tell him how ashamed I was that he even considered this option, and how he had given up all rights when he handed over custody of his daughter to me following Syl's death. My brother's face flushed red with rage at my statement, but I continued before he could interject again. I voiced my disappointment that he had not been present for my niece during all of these years. I didn't hesitate to remind him that, while I realized Syl had betrayed him, he should also see that she had been the victim of countless traumas. It was unjust of him to put the blame onto her now, especially because he had not supported her after her first sexual assault. When I revealed the assault, his eyes widened in amazement, and he demanded to know how I knew about it. As no one else knew the truth. This is when I told him that Syl had confided in me and entrusted me with the task of caring for my niece before she died. When my brother heard this, he became accusatory, alleging I had surprised him and labeling me a liar, just like Syl. I shook my head, reminding him that Syl was terminally ill and had already endured enough. After all the years of him not taking responsibility for my niece while I had done everything I could to assist her, he had no right to bring up the past and complain now simply because he wanted Syl's money. I was weary of him constantly behaving like a victim. It was disheartening to see him shift blame and claim entitlement when he had not been financially supportive of my niece for years. His boldness in coming 16 years later and requesting ownership of her house felt like a slap in the face, ignoring all of my sacrifices and attempts to assure my niece's well-being and future security. My brother was unhappy because I refused to give in to his demands. Since our meeting, he and my parents have called me often, accusing me of being difficult for no reason and insisting that I have family devotion to them rather than my niece. It's demoralizing and terrifying to discover that when it comes to money, even your own blood relatives can devolve into something unknown. I continue to stand up for my niece and refuse to give in to my brother's unreasonable demands. Update 1. First and foremost, I am astounded by how kind everyone has been in my DMs and comments. Thank you for making me grin. Second, I can't tell you how many women have contacted me, giving their own stories and saying how closely they connect to what Syl went through. I wish I could give every one of you a great, tight embrace and relieve your anguish. Sexual assault is one of the most horrible things that can happen to a woman, and I wish someone could have helped Syl at the time. She wasn't a bad person, and she didn't deserve what she went through. It's unfortunate that I have to defend her, but just because you haven't suffered sexual assault doesn't imply others don't. Syl had demonstrated amazing courage following the first assault, but the second occurrence left her shaken, rightly so. She was immobilized in fear, as many sexual assault victims are. I wish she had felt comfortable enough to open up to me sooner, because I would have been there for her in every way. Knowing what she went through crushes my heart, and I wish I could have been there for her during those difficult days. To those who label Syl a cheater and question her narrative, I really pray you never go through such anguish only to have your truth challenged. If Syl had really had an affair, she may have instructed me to contact the man for custody after she died. Furthermore, if there had been an affair, the man would not have remained silent all these years. He would have most certainly come up, especially given how much money Syl left behind for her kid. If she had an affair, I'm sure she would have wanted her daughter to know her biological father. Syl did everything possible to safeguard her daughter. Update 2. I sat down with my niece and told her that my brother had lately been to speak with me, and his main goal was to gain control of the house. I advised her to be cautious if he ever approached her. As I talked, I could see the rage and pain in her eyes. She had hoped for years that her father would reach out to her because he actually cared. However, when she discovered that his contact was motivated by his own wants, she felt deceived. I can't believe him, she informed me, her voice shaking from emotion. After all this time, he only reached out when he needed something. She informed me that she did not want anything to do with him and expressed her gratitude that her mother had not left him anything. She then hugged me and expressed her gratitude for everything I'd done for her over the years. Her statements were simultaneously painful and empowering to hear. It brought tears to my eyes as I understood that despite the sorrow of her father's acts, she was strong and determined to carry on without him. Update 3. After speaking with my niece, I decided to send a lengthy email to my parents and brother to document everything and state my position clearly. In the email, I described our previous interactions and highlighted that they had no right to ask me to hand over my niece's home to my brother. I stressed that this request constituted financial fraud and stated unequivocally that I would take legal action if my brother attempted to see me or my niece again to request the house for his family. I informed my brother that by choosing not to care for his kid, he surrendered all rights. I also discussed the numerous difficulties and frustrations I had encountered while raising my niece on my own, with no prior experience. I highlighted the emotional, financial, and logistical hurdles I had faced in providing her with a secure and caring home. I also informed him that he had never paid child support or checked in on his daughter in all these years. I pointed out that he and my parents should feel nothing but guilt for attempting to take something that did not belong to them. I insisted that they had no right to suddenly intervene and make demands after all this time, especially because they had contributed nothing to her upbringing or well-being. The email was detailed and sincere, reflecting the sacrifices I had made for my niece. I reaffirmed my resolve to protect her and honor Syl's wishes no matter what. My message was clear and unequivocal. They had forfeited their right to be a part of her life due to their negligence and lack of support, and they had no place in her future. I never received a response after submitting the email. However, my brother and parents have not contacted me again, which is satisfactory for me. The silence speaks volumes, and I'm happy to have some peace knowing they won't meddle with my niece's life anymore. My niece is now preparing for her prom and impending birthday celebration. Watching her manage these thrilling occasions makes me very proud. I am so proud of the woman she has become, and I can't wait to support her at every big milestone in her future. It makes me emotional just thinking about how much she has grown and how much she resembles Syl, especially in her lips and brows. Every day I see Syl's strength and tenacity in my niece, and I only hope that she will be as strong as her mother, no matter what she does. I feel unsafe because my autistic neighbor exhibits strange behavior. He constantly follows me when I take my dog outside at night. Hi all, I've never posted here before but I've been thinking about writing this for a while now, since I'm really starting to feel uncomfortable and could really use some advice for who to contact and what to do. I 23F live in student housing as a graduate student. I have my own apartment in a small multifamily complex. There are about 4 other students there, one of which I will refer to as S, 45M. S has autism. I know these terms are outdated, but for context, his autism is rather profound, and he has lots of social difficulties and stims in conversation. I previously haven't had any real difficulties interacting with him, especially since I used to be an instructor for children with autism and am used to handling various social behaviors from people on the spectrum. But in the past couple of months, his behavior towards me has changed, and I'm at a loss for what to do. I take my dog out at various times throughout the night to relieve herself. There is only one way out of the complex, and I have to pass by S's apartment in order to do this. But after living here for about 6 months, I didn't have any trouble with this. Sometimes, he'd come out to say hi, and I'd let him pet my dog. But this was always at an appropriate time. About a month and a half ago, things started to get weird when I took my dog out at 4:30 a.m., which isn't unusual, and saw him peeking at me through the window. He then opened the door and came outside to sit down and pet my dog. She started barking and I politely told him that I can't have her barking at this time of night and took her inside. I'll admit I felt a bit uncomfortable with him coming out so late at night. After all, he is a large older man and I'm a very small female. For the next month, I would notice S lingering outside the apartments a lot more often. I found it disconcerting when he was doing this late at night. My partner, 20F, came to visit for a month, and while she was there, his behavior got even stranger. Nearly every time I took my dog outside, he would open his door and come out to talk to me, which made me uncomfortable because it seemed he was actively watching for me. But when I asked my partner to come out with me, he would open the door, see her with me, and then close the door without a word. It got to the point where I no longer wanted to take my dog out alone and eventually put up a security camera for peace of mind. The day my security package was actually delivered, my partner was up having a school Zoom meeting in my kitchen, while I slept. Apparently, during the meeting, she started to hear him yell my name outside my door, followed by, "Package." And she ignored it, but it went on for several minutes. This made me really nervous to hear about, and after I put the camera up the behavior slowed. But the other day, my partner went back to her home state again, and S's behavior changed again. He came up to me on the way back from doing laundry in our shared laundry room and asked me if I was a lesbian. I was kind of taken aback, but figured since he has autism, he doesn't really understand if a question is inappropriate. But 2 days later, it got worse. I was taking my garbage out, and there's a small alley between our apartments and the dumpsters. There is only one way in or out. It was nearly midnight and I checked the cameras first to ensure I was alone before going out, but when I turned around, he was standing in the alley, nearly blocking my way out. He looked on the verge of tears. I awkwardly said hi and stepped around him so I wouldn't be cornered in the alley, and he started confessing a variety of emotional and family problems to me. I could see he was having a hard time, so I was polite and answered him and advised him to see a therapist if he needed someone to talk to. He then said something odd to me about not having a partner and how he wanted one really badly, not to put me on the spot, and mentioned he knew about my current partner. Of course, now I think I see why he's been acting so strange towards me. Here's the thing though. He's still following me outside when I take my dog out, and sometimes will just stand there quietly and watch if I'm not engaging with the conversations he's trying to start. I have started carrying pepper spray and will admit I'm feeling very concerned for my safety. My mom says it's a harmless crush and I should just politely tell him to stop cornering me, but I don't know how to safely have this conversation, just in case I may actually be in danger, and I don't feel comfortable doing so. Any advice on what I should tell him to make him understand his behavior is making me feel unsafe? Should I even tell him? Even though he has autism, I feel like he should know not to corner me in an alley at midnight. My school does not have many people working during the summer, and I'm not sure who I should report this to, if I do. Several people close to me who have met him, including someone who is also on the autism spectrum, are telling me to not confront him and just report this behavior. But again, my parents just say his autism is making it difficult to understand that his sudden change in behavior is off-putting, and he's getting over a harmless crush. Either way, I feel unsafe at times, and I want to hear some advice from you guys as to what I should do. Advice from anyone on the spectrum would be especially appreciated, since I want to know if maybe I'm just misinterpreting his challenged social skills as something more concerning. Thank you so much. Update. Thank you all for the replies. You guys are so helpful and have helped me realize the danger I'm in. I want to believe this is the best case scenario, where he just doesn't realize his behavior is inappropriate. Logically, this is the most likely case, but I have to base my actions around a worst case scenario. My gut says something is very wrong. You guys are right that I need to listen to that. My safety has to take priority over his feelings, and I will be doing everything I can to avoid interactions with him. This weekend, he hasn't come up to me directly. He has, however, been coming outside at night after 2:30 a.m., searching the yard where I usually take my dog, and then going straight back inside, 2 nights in a row now, as caught multiple times by my camera. Don't know why else he would do this other than to look for me, and this makes me especially unnerved that he's only attempting that approach at night now, as if he's trying to catch me off guard. I called my parents and broke down crying after reading all the comments you guys left in this thread, and they're finally taking me seriously. My mom purchased me a stun gun, which I will not be going outside without. I'm also not leaving the house alone anymore at all, not even to take the trash out. My dog will be accompanying me for everything. I didn't mention it in my previous post, but my dog is a pit bull, and even though she's the sweetest and has never once been aggressive, she is fiercely loyal, and I believe she could do some serious damage if someone attacked me. I also put in contact alarms for my windows and got a better deadbolt for my door, and my partner has also offered to come stay with me to help keep me safe. He has never approached me when I'm not alone. So for everyone who's been concerned for my safety, thank you, and I hope that shows I'm taking serious steps to keep safe. This morning, I submitted a report to the school and explained the situation in depth, including sending them footage from my security camera of him following me and my dog outside late at night. I requested they keep my report anonymous. I asked them to do a mental welfare check on him and connect him with counseling resources, and as some of you have suggested, I'm asking them to call and remind him not to approach people late at night while they're on their own. Those were my only specific requests, but I told them I need intervention, and I need it now. I got a call back within a few hours and learned my case was fortunately assigned to a man who's worked with autistic adults for years prior to transferring to work at the university, so he's very understanding of the situation and why it's so complex, and will be working on connecting us with resources for his mental health and to point out which behaviors are appropriate, inappropriate. I'm hoping this is the best case scenario, and that this intervention will be positive. If it's not, however, then I will be asking the housing department to temporarily move me. I feel much better with the help and communication I'm getting from the school, but I will continue to treat this like I'm in very real danger, because I might be. This post blew up, so I will update it if something more substantial happens. But for now, the situation is reported and you can assume no news is good news. Now to the next story, Story 2. My ex-girlfriend committed suicide. I am a firefighter and had to find her body. It's been a bit over 6 months since I posted that story and I want to give you a quick update on my life. I'm on mobile, so I apologize if it makes it harder to read. TLDR, my ex-girlfriend got into an abusive relationship with a drug addict. She was dealing with depression for a while and killed herself. I am a firefighter in NJ, but go to school in NH. I received the call and conducted research to find her. I drove back down to help with the search. We found her body in the woods and she wrote me a suicide note. Where I left off was me upset about the situation and upset with the world, and most importantly, upset with myself. I was in a dark place for a while after that. I drank and shunned out everyone but my friends who were helping me. For a good amount of time I distanced myself from any girl who I met. The funeral wasn't long after and Jim didn't even show up. I'm not sure if he was invited, but it just shows the type of guy he is. I didn't feel comfortable with dating anyone, let alone even hooking up with them. It felt wrong and I was scared I would get close to someone and lose them again. The depression I felt was destructive. My chief reached out to me not long after because I never told him how I knew her. He asked me to see a therapist and that he can set up a visit at the firehouse. I was in NH, so I told him I'll see my college counseling center and send him confirmation. I lied, I sent him a fake email and he believed me. I had this notion that I don't need help because I help people. After 3 months I was still depressed, but I started to talk to girls again. I met this really nice girl named Sarah. We talked and even hooked up a couple times. After a month and a half she asked if we could start dating. I told her I couldn't. I told her my story and said I don't feel comfortable being close with anyone. She took it well and still wanted to talk, but I couldn't anymore. I felt as if she crossed a line in my mind and we couldn't go back. I didn't want to be close with anyone like that again. Fast forward another month, my friend Kelsey asked if I wanted to go to her sorority formal with one of her friends. I accepted and that's when I met Kristen. Kristen was perfect, she was really sweet and a great date. We ended up talking for a while and this time I decided it was time to be proactive. I opened up to her about what happened to me and I told her I want to take it very slow. She completely understood. Instead of scaring her off, she helped me more than anyone has ever had. She convinced me that avoiding therapy is a bad move, and that there is no shame in seeking counseling. So I made an appointment and went. The therapist told me about a suicide prevention org on campus that I should join and tell my story. I joined them and they had suicide prevention events where people tell their stories to help others. I did my first story and Kristen and a bunch of my friends went to support me. It was one of the most touching moments of my life standing up on that stage and seeing all those people. I continued doing these events and Kristen went to every single one. After 6 months I told her I'm ready to start dating, but to understand that I may be distant at first because I'm not used to this. She understood. We've been together for 8 months and she's amazing. She's the nicest and most supportive person I've ever met. Every time I'm in NJ I go to Lydia's house and support her mom. On Christmas I got a crew to come to her house and deliver presents to her mom's boyfriend's autistic son and her nephews. The way I was able to get relief from my pain was helping others. And if it wasn't for Kristen I wouldn't have the guidance to do it. My girlfriend of a year slept with another guy while we were taking it slow, a month into dating me. I have been with this girl I'll call Jess for close to a year now. Since specifics matter here, we started dating around last Thanksgiving, but it was only about a month later when we said we were in an official relationship. I really liked this girl from the get-go, and we've gotten very close since then, and we're actually planning on moving together soon. Here's a problem. Recently Jess and I ran into a guy at a small get-together with mutual friends. They exchanged a weird look like there was something between them, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. During the party something came up about the place Jess went to for a date. The time was clear since it was a Christmas market in my town, and again I thought something was off about the guy. Well, later that night I actually got a text from him. He got my number from one of the mutual friends, but said, "Hey, I don't know you, but I thought you should know that Jess and I hooked up right after Christmas." I confronted Jess about this and I could tell she tensed up right away. She got this sad look on her face, but confessed right away. She said she had met this guy on Tinder and hooked up a couple of times but stopped any contact before we became official. She said she wasn't sure we would get into a relationship at that time, but she still felt bad that I found out this way. She said she considered telling me but was afraid it would ruin things between us. I told her I needed some time to think and proceeded to get drunk that night and ignored her texts. The thing is, I feel very betrayed and I'm really considering ending things. Sure, we weren't official when this happened, but we had already been on multiple dates at that time, and I thought it was pretty clear that we were moving towards a full-fledged relationship. On my side, I had no interest in pursuing other girls at that point because I only wanted to be with Jess. And on her end she was definitely hinting at us evolving into a couple and strongly hinting at exclusivity. The other part that kills me is that during this early stage, Jess specifically said she wanted to take things slow physically until we knew each other better. But during this same time she hooks up with a guy she barely knew from Tinder. When I asked her this, she said it's different because she took it slow with me specifically because she thought we would get into a relationship, but it was somehow different with a casual hookup. That logic makes zero sense to me. I don't really want to talk about it with my friends because I think they would hate Jess if they end up staying together. But I would like to hear opinions here. Would you stay in a relationship like this if things were going well but the beginning was so shady? TL.er. My GF met up and hooked up with a guy while we were dating but not officially while she was taking it slow with me. Relevant comments. Comment 1, in my opinion, if you're dating someone and moving towards a serious relationship you don't freaking bang other people. This would be a deal breaker for me, but you do you man. If you can't get past it then end it. OP, yeah that's how I feel as well. It would have been one thing if she was just talking to other guys in the early stages while we were still defining things. Of course that's fine and normal, but it feels like a slap in the face that she found another guy to sleep with after we had already gone on quite a few dates and I made it clear I thought we were moving towards a serious relationship, which she seemed to also acknowledge. There is no way she didn't know I would feel hurt that she did that. OP also added to a deleted comment. Teacher logic made no sense to me. She tried to explain that with guys she wants to be in a relationship, she wants it to feel special and wants to build an emotional connection. But for guys she sees no future. She sometimes just wanted some physical fun that meant nothing. But I just can't wrap my mind about that. It feels like a gut punch that as we were getting closer and building a connection she didn't want to be intimate with me, but instead preferred to find someone else. No matter how she rationalizes it, it's hard not to feel like a second choice of sorts. Update. As the title says, I decided to break up with Jess. I kept going back and forth because I was worried I was throwing away a great thing over something that happened in the past, but the problem is I thought I really wouldn't be able to get past it. I can't help what she did was really shitty. Yes, I know that technically she did not cheat, but she knew that I wanted a real relationship and that we were potentially moving in that direction. But meanwhile she expected me to plan, and pay for, interesting dates, court her and prove that I was worthy of her while she happily hooked up with randos who basically did nothing but show an interest in fucking. Fuck that. In a follow-up conversation it also came up that her friends sort of guided her to act like this. That she should basically allow herself to have fun and to keep her casual options open but with me to make me work for it, and show that I wasn't just looking for sex but was capable of being a committed partner. The whole thing just seems so manipulative and ugly, and these were also mutual friends who I considered to be nice girls and now my friends as well. Now I never want to see any of those pieces of shit ever again. Anyway. I know this is starting to sound a bit like a rant lol, but I felt pretty pissed off and basically called it quits. The actual breakup was actually quite unpleasant. No harsh words were exchanged, but Jess cried and we kind of talked about some happy times. I guess that's the hardest part about this, like I don't think she is a bad girl and maybe we could have had a nice future together like we did over the past few months. But in the end, I do think I made the right decision. I want to be with someone who treats me well from the get-go, not someone who manipulates me while playing games just so she can have her cake and eat it too. Now to the next story, story 2. My wife made negative comments about our daughters posing for her school photos. Am I the asshole for getting angry at my wife over this? I, 60, have been married to my wife, 51, for around 15 years. We also have a beautiful daughter named Hayoung, 17, who is in her junior year of high school. Yesterday after school, Hayoung, pronounced Hayoung, came up to me and my wife and showed me her school pictures, both her individual photo and her group grade photo. They were taken all the way back in February, but they had just arrived today. I complimented Hayoung and told her how beautiful she looked in the photos, before telling her how proud I was to see her grow up throughout the ages, before showing my wife the pictures of our daughter. It did not go the way I hoped it would go. Instead of looking at it for a bit before saying something, my wife immediately pointed out to Hayoung that she was looking too downward, at the camera and that her eyes looked strained/forced. I was a bit taken aback at first, but I decided to just keep listening. My wife then said to my daughter that she would have to have rehearsals for school pictures with her for next year, because in my wife's words, Hayoung still doesn't understand how to properly pose, smile and look beautiful for a school picture. I was a bit irritated, but I let it slide. What set me off though, was my wife then said, Hayoung's picture is a fail. Honestly, Melissa looks the prettiest out of everyone. Hayoung got quiet and said, I'm gonna be honest, my picture this year is really bad compared to sophomore year. I got mad that evening. We had a huge argument in the living room. I told my wife that she was being cruel to our daughter and since school pictures were over, there was no point being so picky over it. My wife retaliated, saying that, even Hayoung says that she doesn't like how she looks in her school picture. I was just being honest, I'm only trying to help her. She then went into her room and started crying, saying that I don't understand her. I will admit, I raised my voice while we were having that argument and I'm seriously sitting here questioning myself about whether I was an asshole or not. After our argument, I knocked on Hayoung's door and I could tell by her expression that she had listened to every piece of the argument. I feel bad because I may have overreacted to something as simple as school pictures. Plus, I ruined my daughter's evening and my wife's too, and I also made my wife cry. TLDR, I shouted at my wife after she made some comments about my daughter's school photos and I'm wondering if I'm the age. Edit 1. This is not the first time my wife has said something like this. This is why I feel even more terrible because I let my daughter suffer like this. I did give my wife a word or two, but I always told Ha-young that this was just the way she spoke and that she really did love her. I really want to cry right now, especially overhearing Ha-young crying herself to sleep last night. She always kept a brave face around me and my wife, but it just breaks me even more, now knowing she feels like she can't talk to me either. I failed her. Ha-young always asked me every morning if she looked beautiful. She would always ask at meal times if she was eating too much. I'm so afraid of the damage we both put her through for so long. I'm so scared she's going to develop an eating disorder and I'm going to make sure to set things straight with my wife and take care of my daughter better. She is always my first priority. Edit 2. I was taken off guard even though my wife has made responses like this in the past, because though it's not the first time, I had a little bit of hope left that she wouldn't point out Ha-young's appearance that outright in her school photo. Relevant comments. Commenter, I am guessing based on the fake name that your wife is Korean. I know beauty standards there are super high and she could be projecting her own insecurities and maybe even comments that she got when she was young. Of course this is not okay, but it could be worth sitting down with her and having a talk. OP, you're right, me and my wife are both Korean. The beauty standards there are super tough, so I'm probably going to talk to my wife privately to understand why she said that and check up on Ha-young a bit before talking with my wife. I know she's super shaken up, so the best I can do is be the best father I can. To another commenter. I've lived in the States longer than in Korea now. Commenter, do Korean women tend to have very high beauty maintenance standards? And no, you are not in the wrong. Teenage girls are already extremely sensitive about their looks, so your compliment was kind and nurturing. OP, I cannot speak on the behalf of everyone. I know that the beauty standards are extremely tough there. I've heard people commenting about the fatness, skinniness of people's bodies. I've sometimes heard conversations about K-pop idols' bodies and faces, makeup, surgery, etc. Later that night in comments, hello everyone, OP here. Tonight, since my wife is working a night shift today, I decided I'm going to stay together with Ha-young for a daddy-daughter date. I know it doesn't matter whether we go out or not, all that matters is that I'm with her. I'm planning on making her some of her favorite foods and spending quality time as an apology for not being there when I should have been. She loves japchae, galbi and cream bunjopang. I asked Ha-young beforehand whether she wanted to stay at home or go out and she wanted to stay home and she chose to go with the first option. I'll let you know how it goes. Update post, July 16, 2024, about 5 weeks later. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for their generous comments and advice. As promised, here is the update. After my wife left for work, I decided to check up on my daughter. She was in her room doing homework and I could tell by the forced expression that she was not okay. As she talked, everything began to make sense. My daughter overheard her mother shaming her in front of the other church moms. She heard them boasting about their kids and her mother would use condescending modesty, e.g., she's gained weight and she doesn't even study hard. She was tired of trying to surpass my wife's expectations. She couldn't stand it when my wife was in the house. She asked me, why am I her diamond? She cuts me to make me shine. How more of this should I take? I prepared all the foods I promised to make and she was hesitant but ate a lot more than when my wife was around. She wanted to further talk with me. I then asked if she wanted me to tell my wife how she felt. Ha-young said, it was the only way to get her to listen, before telling me she wants me to get a divorce. I asked her if she was absolutely sure, as it was something very serious. She said she was fine with it. I'm just devastated it has reached this point. When Ha-young was at school, I had a conversation with my wife. I brought up Ha-young's concerns, along with mine. I asked my wife what made her put down my daughter on the day of the school picture incident. She made excuses such as having bad days, hence she'd accidentally release her anger and other emotions by yelling, the silent treatment, etc. I questioned further if there was anything in the past that was bothering her, which she replied snarkily, nothing is bothering me. I raised her into a better person. If you have problems with how I'm raising her, she's all yours. I don't want to argue anymore, especially with a sensitive, lazy person like you. We had a lot of arguments in the past on raising Ha-young. This phrase was used in all of our arguments to shut me up. As Ha-young was consistently used as an emotional punching bag and a trophy for my wife, this was the last straw. I told my wife, we were done, then told her to pack up and leave. I thanked her for letting me realize my self-worth. After some time had passed, she had driven to her parents' house and was staying there for a bit. When Hyung came back, she noticed her mom's room was a lot better than it was and knew what had happened. I hugged Hyung and told her I was sorry for the mess I had caused, before reassuring her that nothing was her fault. I told her my ex-wife would come back a few more times to collect the rest of her stuff, but our relationship was over. This event shook me up a lot, but I know things will get better. I'm trying to make Hyung always feel loved. Hyung, you are my universe and that will never change. After discovering my husband's autism and kitty food preference, I faced deceit and marital stress, leading to my decision to divorce. Well, it's been a lot longer than the 1-week update I promised. I could make excuses but I won't. For those of you who don't want to read my original post, I asked for help with my husband's food preference issues and through talking with many people on here and, ultimately, his mother, it was revealed that he was diagnosed with autism as a child. Some of the comments on my original post were not so kind. I got a lot of accusations that still hurt me. Some just make me angry, particularly the person who commented simply, "Please don't bully him. He's my goddamn husband. Not a schoolyard friend, not a sibling, not a child. Infantilizing him doesn't help his case at all." Moving on. I was very upset as he had never mentioned anything to me. We've discussed all sorts of medical issues together but his diagnosis never came up. I want to stress this. This isn't a matter of me not wanting to be married to an autistic man. This is a matter of my husband keeping something important from me and causing me a great deal of stress that could have been avoided if I was aware of his diagnosis. For example, I continuously pushed him to try new foods or attend concerts or visit loud amusement parks. I knew he wasn't particularly thrilled about any of those things, but they are all very normal couple activities that I wanted us to experience together. Had I been aware of his autism, I would have had a better understanding of how negatively these things affected him. And made more of an effort to integrate things he liked with things I liked, maybe a smaller local band, or a craft fair instead of an amusement park. Anyways. That's the backstory. Read below for the update. Update. I confronted him about my conversation with his mother the night before our counseling appointment. I made sure to bring it up casually so I didn't become angry again. He tried to brush me off at first, saying he didn't know what I was talking about. After talking for a bit, he eventually confessed that he not only knew of the diagnosis but deliberately kept it from me. He said I was his dream and he didn't want to do anything to ruin our perfect relationship. I explained how him keeping this from me hurt me. I explained how I could have been there to support him instead of feeling like he needed to hide. He said he wasn't ashamed of it at all. He explained that it's just not something that affects him anymore. I, again, explained how it affects me, but he didn't seem to care. I didn't show him the post I made, but I used some of the advice from you all to try to explain why his autism really does in fact still affect his life. We went to bed upset. The next day he acted like nothing happened. We ate breakfast, he had chicken nuggets, and went about our day. I kept expecting him to bring it up but he never did. I didn't have the nerve to bring it up again until later at the marriage counselor's office. I spoke to the counselor so as not to seem accusing and explained that this was an issue that bothered me. My husband actually laughed and said he assumed I'd gotten over it by now. When I explained that no, I really hadn't, he got angry with me and stormed out. The counselor tried to mediate but it wasn't much use as my husband went to wait in the car. I was worried he'd leave without me so I cut the meeting short. Our ride home was quiet. It wasn't until we got home that I said I was worried he was keeping other things from me too. He said he'd been reading online about how women can't understand autism and therefore he didn't think it was important to tell me about it. I said that was the weakest excuse I'd ever heard. He then said that I'd leave him if I knew. I said if I left him it'd be because he's a liar. Apparently he told all of our mutual friends that he'd just been diagnosed with autism and I was considering leaving him because of it. Now many of our friends won't talk to me and act very cold when we run into each other in public. I don't know what else he's told them, but I think he told someone I cheated on him as a fake account has been commenting horrible things about me and my supposed sexual habits on all of my Instagram posts. I keep reporting them but then it seems like another just pops up in its place. I haven't decided if divorce is the right path. I know he's been browsing incel and other bitter male-centric websites. One of his friends is a self-described incel, so I'm even more convinced that this isn't the man I married. I'm mostly just confused. I've been avoiding him at home and it feels like more of a roommate situation at this point. He doesn't really leave his den until it's time for work, and then he's back in the den until bed. It seems like everything is messed up, just from me wanting to help. I don't even know what to expect at this point, much less how to move on from here. Edit. There are so many more comments than I anticipated. I'm trying to at least read through most of them, although I think I'm past my emotional ability to reply. I'm really shocked at how overwhelmingly supportive people are. Thank you. I'm going to be discussing divorce with a lawyer. I don't know how to bring it up with him, but I'm past the point of caring. You're all right. I dread coming home to him in the evenings. I dread if he will miraculously want to talk. This isn't healthy for either of us. At the very least, some time apart would be good. That's all for now. I don't think I'll update past this, as I'm already uncomfortable with how quickly this blew up. But I will be living elsewhere by the end of the month. Now to the next story, story 2. My wife will not shut up, and I'm not sure I can take it that much longer. Is it possible for that to be a reason to leave? I'm not sure if I should have posted this on AITA instead. But here goes. My wife will not shut up. I'm not talking about your usual chatty Kathy. I mean, she almost literally will not shut up. She will talk continuously from the moment she knows I am within earshot. Not just in the same room. I mean, as soon as it's reasonable to assume that I can hear her. She will not stop talking until I'm gone, and sometimes not even then. On more than one occasion, I've gone into the bathroom, turned on the loud exhaust fan, taken a leisurely dump, and then returned to hear her cheerfully engaged in the same conversation she was enjoying before I went in. She also refuses to use the exhaust fan while she's in the restroom because it would prevent her from being heard. So I get to hear all the bathroom noises on top of whatever Homeric epic about her friend's cousin's girlfriend's hairdresser she's blathering on about. I once drove from Tampa, Florida to Chicago, Illinois with her, before we were married. I'm such an idiot. Without saying more than 10 sentences. She did not stop talking the entire way. The entire way. Television onto a show I like? Pfft, that's not a problem. She'll happily turn the volume down so it doesn't get in the way. Having sex? That's the perfect time to tell me about how Olivia Newton-John still has the leather pants she wore in Grease, and she, brace yourself, still fits in them. Really? Needless to say, we don't go to the movies. Ever. I've been shushed out of too many theaters. I get it. She grew up in a huge Italian Catholic family in the Bronx. If you don't talk loud and constantly, you don't get to talk at all. I, on the other hand, grew up in a Scandinavian family with 2 children. To this day, I'm not sure we ever had a conversation in our house. I actually often wonder if that's what made me attractive to her. I was taught to politely listen to people and then wait for them to finish before replying. She never finishes, or takes a breath, it sometimes seems. So to her I'm paying rapt attention to her no matter how much she talks. That's not true though. Another difference between people of Swedish heritage is that we don't use filler words for acknowledgement. Other than the Minnesota nah, useful on every occasion, we're pretty much silent when we listen to others. No or yeah or OMG needed. A nod of the head every 10 minutes or so is all you need to convey your attentiveness. I think it has a lot to do with living in the frigid north. You keep your mouth open as much as my wife does, and your teeth are going to shatter from the cold. To her, that's like being in the room with a dead person. She's always stopping to ask, "Are you even listening?" Or say, "You never pay attention to me." Or even quiz me with, "What did I just say?" I've become an expert at storing the last 2 to 4 words she says and parroting them back at her. She'll be like, blah blah blah. And then she told him she wasn't taking that kind of crap anymore. And I'll go, "That kind of crap." As if I had any idea what kind of crap it was or who it was that wouldn't take it anymore. And she'll say, "Yeah," and think I've been paying attention the whole time. I joke about it a lot, but it's actually getting to the point where it's a problem. Our son is 7 years old, and he has developed a pronounced stutter because she interrupts him constantly. Growing up in her house, if anyone paused even for a millisecond, that was grounds for talking over them. And you talked loud so they didn't finish. My son apparently inherited some of my less staccato speech patterns, and she basically just uses that to interrupt and take over the conversation. It got so bad that he started automatically stopping and restarting words, even when not being interrupted. I didn't know that was considered a stutter until we went to one of those parent-teacher night things, and a teacher listened to wife and then turned to me and said, "Well, at least now I know why Josh has a stutter." Just like that. She's failed at least one job interview because of this. I know because I lined it up with a business acquaintance myself. He called me up and said sorry, but he just couldn't take being in the same room with her because she wouldn't stop talking. We rarely are invited for a second couple's date. She monopolizes the conversation every time we go out with other people. Who wants more than one does of that? You're probably wondering, well, have you told her about this? Yes. Many times. Sometimes jokingly. Sometimes with utter seriousness. The reactions vary from anger, talks louder, higher, faster, and uses lots more swear words, to tears. She's the only person I know who can carry on a totally unrelated conversation while sobbing hysterically. The one thing that doesn't happen is her talking any less. I try not to let it get to me. She's a very affectionate woman. Loves me to death. Mother of my child. Pretty as the day we met, prettier even. We still get plenty of alone time. Granted, she won't shut up while we're doing it, but I'm pretty busy so I don't really notice as much. But it does get to me. It's selfish and shows a lack of self-awareness. There's a time and a place for enthusiastic conversation, and they're not always and everywhere. I know the answer to the problem. I have to talk back. In effect, the only thing that possibly could shut her up is for me to do the same thing as she does. I would have to interrupt at the slightest pause. I would have to talk louder, yelling if necessary, when she tries to interrupt me. I would have to learn to use Italian hand gestures to emphasize my points and chop off her objections. But I'm not Italian. I'm a waspy pale dude who grew up in a household that would have made a mortuary sound like a middle school cafeteria. 12 years of this has finally pushed me to the brink. I'm not sure I can take it that much longer. I'm just not sure if I could get a word in to tell the judge why I'm there in his divorce court. My wife wouldn't let me. TL.dr. Wife will not shut up. Is that reasonable grounds for leaving her? Edit, obligatory Reddit. OMG, I had no idea this would blow up. Which is true. I thought maybe a couple of people would just call me an asshole and that would be it. But RIP. Inbox. It was nice to know you. So in the interest of not replying to every comment, I will try to address some of the common ones and answer some of the questions I saw popping up multiple times. Also thanks for the, often hilarious, advice. Q1. Is this BS? Implied. A1. No, it's all mostly true. I admit to some embellishment for dramatic comedic effect though. The bit about the leather pants is representative, not an actual quote. Not from Sexy Times anyway. She probably mentioned it at some point though. Q2. Why didn't you run away screaming before you got married? Sub-question. Was OP's wife hot? A2. Yes, she is hot, and funny, and vivacious. Also, I really was a Nordic silent bear. Thanks, you/Sarah_Dragonfire, my wife drew me out of my shell. And if I'm brutally honest with myself, when you're young and getting laid on the regular, a lot of things don't seem all that terrible. Damn you penis, this is all your fault. Q3. Did your kid really develop a stutter because of this? A3. Medically speaking, I cannot state this with 100% certainty. The cause was never formally diagnosed. However, I watched it happen firsthand. I'm not a qualified speech therapist, but I think it was a reasonable conclusion to draw based on the observations I made. I'd welcome a dissenting opinion from an actual professional though, if only to salve my conscience. Which leads to, Q4. Aren't you really the one responsible for your kid's stutter? After all, you did nothing to stop it. A4. Guilty. And I feel utterly like shit about it all the time. For the record, I did bring it up lots of times, even to the point of getting into arguments about it and speaking harshly to my wife when she interrupted my son. But I think by the time I realized it was happening, most of the damage was done. And anything I could do was more expressing my anger about it than actually making an effective change. All the rest of this weirdly long post is just ranting. If there's an actual justification for leaving, this is it, and I'm deathly afraid that she'll get full custody and just make it worse or even irreparable. Q5. Is it because she's, pick one, OCD, insecure, autistic, mentally ill? A5. I don't think so, although I've always sensed an overwhelming need for attention. I see it in her family dynamic, in that all of her many siblings were in constant competition for their parents' attention and affection. Q6. Have you tried counseling? A6. No, probably should have, but I know her well enough that even mentioning it would shatter her. It's bizarre that I can't bring myself to do a lot of things people have suggested, and believe me, I've probably thought of all of them, because they just seem too cruel to me. And yet, I'm seriously considering divorce. I realize the contradiction there. Dad planned to marry his young girlfriend just weeks after my mom's death, threatening to kick me out. Am I the asshole for ruining his wedding? My father has always mistreated me badly. He was obviously not interested in being a dad from a very young age, but I never could find out which he disliked more, being married to my mother or father to me. Given that he treated my mother no better than he treated me, I believe he must have loathed it equally. I lost my mother only 4 weeks back. I turned 17 some months ago. It was not surprising. She had been battling lung cancer for some time and at last passed away in a hospital. 3 years ago she was diagnosed. Since then, it felt like I had been holding my breath. I believe I at last let it all go when Mom died. She was my friend, thus even now it feels quite strange to be without her around. She was most crucially the only person there to guard me from my father. Every single day in the house where I grew up, my parents would argue over something or another. They obviously did not love one another, and I really have no idea why they were married. My mother would tell me that they had loved each other at some time every time I asked her why she had married him. They would always make up, but I never could forgive my father as fast as my mother did. She had been urged to leave him several times as occasionally he would say extremely terrible things to her during a quarrel. He would say things like how he wishes she died from her illness so he could go on with his life and how he regretfully ever was with her and had a child with her. She just resisted when I advised her to go several times. I'm not sure why. Regarding myself, I had wanted to go from the age of 4 years old but had nowhere else to go and no other relatives either. Raised by her grandmother, who passed away while she was in college, my mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was small. She contacted no other family members, hence I knew nothing about my father's side of the family as he never took us to see them. He claimed not wanting us to see his family since he did not get along with them. There was no elaboration, and I asked him too, afraid. I was used to being screamed at for stuff, hence I wasn't going to paint a bullseye on myself by prying into anything like that. I had to deal with my father since, all told, my parents were the only family I had. My mother refused to go. I was heartbroken when she died, but my dad carried on as though nothing had happened. It was not shocking to me in the least since he had been acting the same way even when she was unwell. Knowing he did not love anyone, I did not expect him to be sensitive. He most likely lacked even that ability. What truly startled me though, was that my dad brought home a considerably younger woman once we were finished with the funeral and paperwork 2 weeks after my mother died. She was simply here one morning drinking coffee in our living room. My father told me she was my new mother when I plucked the bravery to ask her who she was. When he was telling me that, he apparently also had the largest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet. Against my will, I found myself remarking on it. Since it had only been 2 weeks since my mother died, I told him it was a little too soon to bring his girlfriend home. That brought me to a lecture from him on how this would be my stepmother in a few days and on the need of respecting her. He told me he didn't care that I had just lost my mother. I had to treat her the same way I had treated my own mother. He dropped another bombshell on me and informed me he was getting married as I was over myself with rage trying to argue with him. Ever since her diagnosis, he claimed, he had known that she would not be able to make it as she had always been delicate and frail ever since he had known her. He had thus begun searching for substitutes. That is exactly the word he used. For the past 2 years he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend. Now that my mother was at last out of the way, he told me he was planning to be married once more and ensure her death had no impact on his life at all. It at once made sense why he had been untouched by my mother's illness and death thus far. He had replaced her. I honestly just turned away from him because I was disgusted. I told him I would not be attending the wedding, and expected him to say he was good with it since, really, why would he care? Then he informed me I had to go, which caught me off guard. He informed me he could only make this look regular and acceptable to other people if I attended, so explaining why it was. He seemed to be saying that by showing up for the wedding, I would have accepted it and that since his own daughter had not objected to this marriage, nobody else would have any cause to remark on it either. Basically, he required me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in and of itself was really crazy. To be honest, my father seemed insane. Besides saying such strange and pointless things, he was getting married 2 weeks after his wife died without thinking about what other people would say. Not only that, the woman marrying him was only 25 at most, a few years older than I am. Her actual age is unknown, however she cannot be older than that. My dad falls in late 40s. This man, who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be in mourning right now, is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to act like this is all normal and that she supports it. It is eerie enough. He definitely belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. It's a complete formula for catastrophe. I told him there was no way I could be at this wedding when he informed me he was marrying Melissa. He was free to become offended at that as desired. Then he informed me he would not only be offended but also kicked me out should I miss a meeting. He would also ensure that I never got access to the college fund my mother and he had been saving for me ever since my birth. Since, as he had stated, my mom's money had gone into the education fund as well as his, so I considered it to be essentially unjust. Although I think I was entitled to it, sadly I couldn't make him turn over the money to me as it is not required by law. There were no records to support it, hence it was not as if he had set it aside especially for that purpose. Basically, I would be tossed out and would not have any chances of attending college either if I skipped that wedding. On one hand, I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this craziness in any kind whatsoever, thus I was in a quite tough situation. However, I also had to look out for myself as I had a few months left before I left for college and I couldn't afford to lose money since I had none of my own. My mother's will takes some time to process, hence I would only obtain the inheritance only then. For now, it seemed as though my only choice was to show up for the wedding and present myself as helping my father. Last week I was informed about the wedding, but I just couldn't get myself to welcome it. I thus resolved that I had to go all out to prevent this from occurring. Or at least try to intervene. I told my father I would be at the wedding, but then I started searching for something, anything, to throw off the proceedings since I just couldn't bring myself to let this happen. I just wanted something. I really had no idea what I was looking for. When my father left his laptop alone, I got quite lucky, miraculously lucky. A few days back, he and Melissa went out to celebrate their marriage by dinner. I was alone at home. Leaving his laptop on the coffee table, my dad had since it was locked. I expected nothing when I opened it, therefore I just tried to guess the password. Fortunately, I got everything just perfect. Melissa's name came first, then his own birthday, which was strangely startling. Still, once I arrived, I could hardly believe it. I first found nothing when I started browsing his social media. Then I saw he had 2 Facebook profiles, and I chose to review the second one, which I had not seen before. Surprising me was his hidden account set up for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me he did not get along with his family, but here he was on his other page hanging out with individuals we had never seen before who seemed to be certainly linked to him. As I searched, additional pictures from years past turned up. He obviously has been in contact with his family all along. He had simply been fooling us. I then chose to review his communications on that account and discovered that he had been in contact with his parents for really a lengthy period. I guess he also carried another phone. From the start, he had been living essentially 2 lives, and nobody knew. Although my mother had known about some of this, she had never shared anything with me. Neither had my mother. I was rather sure his family knew nothing about me whatsoever. Following his talks with his father on his account, I discovered that his father believed he was living away from home for business only, nothing else. He had a full family here, little knowing of it. I snapped brief pictures of those conversations and turned to my own phone to talk to my grandfather. Given all of this was so absurd, I was really anxious about whether he would even believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. Still, I went to my room and signed in using my own Facebook account. I got in touch with the profile I saw on my dad's page. As I had predicted, there had been no mutual friends. So I had never been able to locate him. I had never been able to track these people as I hadn't even known my grandfather's true name for all these years. Having his account now, I messaged him straight away and tried to rapidly explain everything. This was an emergency, hence I provided him my phone number and advised him to get in touch as soon as he could. I included additional pictures of the screenshots I'd taken, outlining how I had tracked his profile. I also sent some pictures of me with my parents so he would know this was not a hoax directed on him. After not hearing anything for the following 12 hours, I nearly gave up hope. Maybe he had chosen not to react since he felt someone was pulling a practical joke on him. But I eventually got a call from my granddad when Dad was at work. I was simply lucky that he had phoned me before that and had not mentioned this to my father. Anyway, I answered my phone and told him what was happening as soon as he called. For the past 17 years, he informed me, he had been made to believe that my father was working elsewhere, that is, away from Iowa, where he was originally from. Apparently, my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had lived whenever they paid him visits. He had also visited his son several times. About none of this, they had the least of knowledge. They had spent the last 12 hours trying to get over the shock of it all. At first this all seemed to them as a joke, but they came to recognize it was real when they viewed my mother in the family pictures I had emailed. Apparently, my father had told his parents he had broken up with my mother, so he had never told them about his marriage and the family he had. They disapproved of her 18 years ago, when my parents first began dating. He had informed my grandparents he had dumped her as they were quite clear they did not want my father to marry my mother. For the past 2 decades, it was the fiction he had been selling. Now he had at last been caught. My grandparents had not wanted my father to wed my mother for really serious reasons. It was because they accused my mother of being a gold digger and she had reportedly been trying to cheat on him. This was due in part to the first time my father had brought my mother home to see his parents. She had instantly targeted his older brother, a surgeon who clearly made more than my father. My uncle's refusal to keep his lips shut over something so significant led my grandparents to learn about it. My father had been asked to split up with my mother, but he had turned down their proposal. I believe it was because of me since, based on my calculations, my mother most likely already was pregnant by then. My parents were given an ultimatum. Either they would cut him off from their life or he would split up with my mother. They understood she was only with him for the money, hence cutting him off would drive my mother to leave him. Eventually, my dad told them he had split things off with my mother, although obviously he had not, as they remained together. And this is the reason I'm here. If my mother had really done such things, I wonder why they stayed together. This fundamentally altered my view of both my parents. Once I knew these things though, I told my grandparents how badly I was being treated and that I had nowhere else to rely on. But I was depending on them now that I knew they existed and wasn't as alone as I had first thought. I still would understand if they turned away from me. Thank goodness they decided to assist me. I was able to stop the wedding from taking place. Like his parents, I returned to my father's house also. 2 days ago they flew down here. Yesterday, I managed to slip them into the wedding. All of a sudden, we were honored guests. Our backyard was the venue for the wedding as just a small number of guests were expected to attend. It was supposed to be a modest and private ceremony. Only my father's colleagues and boss, a couple of his acquaintances, and that was it. He had obviously not invited his family. They had not even received invitations to his first marriage. But I arranged for their attendance at the second. I emailed my grandparents and informed them it was finally time for them to show up as I wanted to halt everything before the vows were taken. Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything. I slipped out right before the vows, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents for the theatrical purposes of it all. My father's face dropped and Melissa seemed fairly perplexed as soon as he saw me walking down the aisle with his parents. Once I drew close to him, I declared that his parents now knew the truth, that I had at last exposed all his falsehoods. He could bid farewell to his inheritance since all was now coming to me rather than to him. Since I already had a place to live, people looking after me, and also my college fund, I no longer needed him either. Knowing he was a liar, I did not want to be with him, so he could do anything he pleased. I then left with my grandparents, and since then we have been staying in a hotel getting ready for our trip back. Since I haven't known these folks, my grandparents need a lot of catching up. Likewise, there is plenty to discuss about my parents. We haven't returned yet mainly because this morning my father finally got in touch with my grandfather and informed him that what he did was simply not proper. He had supposedly never allowed his parents to be happy and accused them of trying to control him all his life. Saying I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anyone else, he also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that. Since Melissa is now avoiding him and the wedding was clearly called off yesterday itself, immediately after we left, he is blaming all of us. I am therefore good with showing up for his second wedding with his parents and exposing him for lying. Update 1, the wedding call-off was 4 days ago. I decided not to answer my father. He does not deserve it. My grandparents agreed as well. He knows where to find us should he wish to communicate with us. We still occupy the hotel. We have provided him with the specifics. If he would want to talk with us, he could come see us and then we could have a personal conversation. But the kind of conversation we wish to conduct over the phone or via text is not this one. He still hasn't turned up yet and just 3 days remain before I return to Iowa with my grandparents. They have a farm there, they're really wealthy, and I will be taken care of considerably better than I was here. They assured me that they would see to it that I could attend the college of my choosing and that I wouldn't have to suffer following this. Since we first met, my grandparents have been almost pampering me. I believe they are attempting to make up for lost time, which is rather lovely of them. Though they seem to love me a lot, they loathe my mother and subsequently my father as well. Update 2. My grandparents and I are meant to be leaving in 2 days. My father decided this morning to at last pay us a visit and speak with us. When they contacted me this morning, I was really taken aback to see him in my grandparents' hotel room, but I immediately recovered and vowed not to talk to him the whole time until he apologized. Clearly though, given someone like him, that is too much to demand. He was here just to discuss how unfair it was that my grandparents had opted to cut him off from their life and hand me all the wealth instead. He claimed to have already lost Melissa, my mother, and his wife as well. Things were already really terrible for him since I also wanted no more contact with him. To top it all, his close friends and colleagues, all the attendees of the wedding, are now acting strange with him. What transpired at the wedding has damaged his reputation. Hence he is thinking of leaving his employment. He believes he cannot operate in such a hostile environment. To put it plainly, he had kind of lost all he owned till a few days earlier. Then we showed him at the wedding, exposed him, and wrecked everything for him. The least we could do was let him inherit, Something he had been striving for years. Otherwise, he would not have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. He started lying since he merely wanted everyone to be happy. After marrying my mother, he said he had intended to tell his parents the truth, but as time went on it became more embarrassing to bring up. He had to keep up his lies and arrange a complex double life. Since everyone, including his parents, was against his happiness, he asserted he was the victim. Now, knowing I would be taken care of anyway, he came here to claim what he felt due to him, the legacy. From the start, he had been hoping and fighting for this. It would be unfair to deny it for such a minor cause. The way he was behaving as the victim infuriated me already. I lost it totally when he declared he deserved the fortune. I screamed out at him before my grandparents could say anything, "If you really deserve that inheritance, then I also deserve to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. He had never shown me any love, affection, or even the smallest of respect. 2 weeks after I lost my mother, he had genuinely threatened to kick me out and use my education fund for his own expenses if I opposed his marriage to his young girlfriend. It was only fair his parents took away anything he thought he deserved since he could not give me anything I deserved. My behavior startled him since I had never before stood up to him like that. But now, thanks to my grandparents, I no longer felt terrified of him. Usually when I was younger, this worked to shut me down. He tried to glare at me, but this time I wasn't going to be silent. Earlier, I would do that since I knew my mother wouldn't leave, probably for the same reason my father didn't cut off relations with his parents, money. Which upon her death, was ultimately futile. Her only advantage from living with him was passing away at a reputable hospital. My dad tried to yell at me when I refused to be quiet, but my grandparents told him it wasn't going to work anymore. My grandparents threatened to call security on him, thus after some conflict he had to leave. He wouldn't get anything unless he owned and accepted his mistakes, they were very plain. It would take a lot even then for them to pardon him. Had I chosen to keep the inheritance for myself, he would not have anything at all. Promising he would make sure we pay the price for what we had done, he fled like a toddler having a tantrum. What he believed he was doing is unknown to me. Though he most likely thought his actions would frighten us, it did not. It strengthened our conviction that, by not forgiving him, we were doing morally. He was not even remorseful, hence nothing could be forgiven. It gives me great pleasure to be leaving with my grandparents in a few days. I simply want to escape all of this. Although I will miss my buddies, it makes no difference now. Fall brings my trip to college. I just finished all of this. I graduated from high school. Update 3. Hi. So I left home 1 year ago. I haven't blogged anything for the previous few months since I have been really busy with college. I had essentially forgotten about it too. Following that battle with my dad in the hotel room, which I discussed in my last update, my grandparents and I headed off. We hardly spoke with my dad over the following 2 weeks, but I did run across a lot of members of his side of the family. I believe this family is the one I deserved all along. They all love me. Though she was too self-serving, my mother most likely attempted to love me. Ultimately, it damaged me more than it did her. My uncle assured me he would pay for my college tuition, therefore relieving me of any concern about it. That has been a great comfort. Though they had hardly known me for a few weeks, these folks had already resolved to show me all the affection I had been lacking for the past 17 years. For that, I am most grateful. A few months after moving in with my grandparents, I had to go to college, so I spent little time with them. My college is near where they reside, so on weekends I get to see them. There are no grievances regarding that. Not to apologize, but rather to remind me that I wrecked him and should feel bad. My father has tried to get in touch with me multiple times. He continues asking me to check on my grandparents to see whether he fits the inheritance. He emails and chats from several accounts but doesn't understand that being defensive won't support his cause. A sincere and honest apology would be the only thing that could assist him, yet at this time, it is too little, too late. I will simply ignore him. It is not worth it to reply to him. I lack the time or will to indulge his illusions. At last, I have the family I am due and am content with them. Right now, I'm loving my college life. So I will concentrate on the advantages in my life and attempt to forget about the past. I simply want to keep on improving personally. I found a tampon in my husband's car and another in our bedroom. Our youngster suddenly got new clothes that I didn't buy, so I assumed he was cheating. For 7 years, married for 4, I, 29F, have been with my spouse, 30M. I have never had cause to fear he was even slightly unhappy with our marriage or even disloyal to me. He enjoys making jokes about us still experiencing the honeymoon phase with 2 children in tow almost 5 years. Had it not for the shocking discovery in his car last month, I would not have questioned it or him. I saw something slatted between the cushions when buckling our daughter into her car seat. Pulling it out, I found it to be a tampon. Had I not had an IUD stopping my period for the past year and had not even noticed the wrapper type, this would not have been so strange. When I told my husband where I had found it and why I was almost sure it wasn't mine, he seemed not to know what it was, let alone why I was holding it. He shrugged and said most likely Fiona, his coworker, owned it. My husband often commutes to lunch with his colleagues, and as we live somewhat close to Fiona and her husband, I assumed it was quite likely the tampon had dropped out of her bag either any time he had driven with her or given her a ride. Not particularly significant. I dismissed it until a few weeks later, when we had supper with Fiona and her husband. I had so wanted to believe my husband, yet I couldn't get over the way it had been buried in the seat and how my husband had seemed to have no concern for it whatsoever. Perhaps he was acting stupidly. It's unknown. I did something that, looking back, I find really insane. While we were out together, I staged an emergency and asked Fiona whether she carried any tampons. I sighed with relief when she handed me one nearly exactly like the tampon I had discovered in our back seat. Thus, the tampon there was most likely the same one used here, and most likely, there was an innocent explanation for why it had been placed in the back seat in the first place. Until I discovered another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer, I assumed I would have seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene goods. The idea of my husband having an affair makes me physically sick. Even more nauseated the idea that the lady might have left these tampons out for me to find. Should it be my husband's coworker, why would she offer me one the other night and give herself away? Under any other circumstance, I would want to discuss this with my husband. But I feel too ill and ashamed to approach him with what I discovered. What action ought I to take? Comments. I never put a tampon in a sock drawer. I had a period 30 years ago. Trust your gut, then get cameras. Neither does I. I have thought up so many reasons for the tampons that would not point to my spouse, but none of them actually make sense. If it means verifying what I currently suspect, I'm afraid to set up a camera. Has Fiona dropped by your house and had time to plant the tampon? She visited our house numerous times, and vice versa. She wasn't over any time in the past week, hence if she planted that second tampon, she had to have found a window of time when I wasn't home. Every time she and her husband visit, we all stay downstairs. You would have to go rather far to get to our bedroom. That is, past the other bedrooms, around our dogs, over the safety gate. Not saying it's impossible, but on a brief toilet stop it's really difficult. I would guess. Your children's ages are, could they have located a tampon and randomly placed it? 2 and nearly 4. Both have a mischievous streak, hence I didn't want to rule out the chance of one of them shifting stuff around, but I can't see how they could get their hands on one, maybe 2 odd tampons that I never bought. Update 1. My own hell for the past few weeks has been thinking about every conceivable source of 2 tampons. Nonetheless, I wanted to provide an update. Not long after uploading on here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon from Fiona, my husband's ignorance, the tampon in the back seat and the one in the sock drawer. All the things I suspected but didn't want to accept. The tampons, save from the one I had already thrown away, matched exactly in varying absorbencies. I hadn't left anywhere my husband or daughters would have found them and relocated them. Regarding what they were or where they had come from, my daughters were clueless. With my spouse or without, my sister was sure it was Fiona. She advised asking Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue since direct confrontation of either party still sounded like a horrible idea. Sadly, they already had preparations in mind. Our house for any misplaced or foreign items, there were none. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none, and even the girls for any new friends they could have met. The final aspect was especially important to my sister's husband, and it helped explain his inclination to think the tampons were safe. Given my husband was the one driving the children to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. If anything had been happening in or around our house, he said it would be almost impossible to keep from me and the girls. That helped me somewhat to feel better. I felt differently only till my younger kid, 2 years old, dropped something down last week. My husband demanded that I continue at work while he stayed home with her, even though I wanted to be the one looking after her. I had no problem with that. At that point, we were all already starting to move past the tampon crisis since my sister and her husband considered it as a positive indication that he would take the time off at short notice. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was merely glad to see a nearly healthy child and a spouse supporting her through it. But towards the conclusion of that week, I returned to find something unusual. Now clad in a onesie I had never seen before, The child I had left that morning in an old PJ set had a small clip in her hair. Though I have a very decent idea of what my children wear on a daily basis, especially in terms of attire, I cannot say I have the best recollection. Before we would have our second, I had vowed off full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before. Long snaps are simply a pain in the ass and a no-go for effective diaper changes. Just not something I would dress her in. My hubby knows as much. He definitely doesn't accessorize the girls' clothes and neither does he plan for or buy them. The idea of someone being around our ill child without our awareness confused and rather stunned me. I went straight to inquire whether anyone had been over to visit my spouse or the girls. I didn't second think. Like before, he seemed perplexed and asked me why I would believe that. All day it had been him and the children. Once more, I asked him whether someone had stopped over to say hello. He denied it. I should cool off, he advised. Our oldest daughter was in the room and realized something was wrong, so even if I might have screamed out and came forward with the charges right then and there. My husband swore that the girls had not been with anyone but him. I asked him a third time in a subdued manner if anyone had been near our children. He also denied styling anyone's hair or shopping for new clothing. I chose to leave since our daughter was in the room and my feelings were all over the range. Then I couldn't make sense of it. It hardly looks clearer now after I drove myself mad with illogical arguments. Comments. My 2-year-old can only string a few words at a time to respond to a few inquiries. She responds depending on the cues I provide when I question her about her time with daddy or her wardrobe. I might inquire, "Who gave you that pretty bow?" And she might answer pretty bow back to me, or mama, or daddy over and over. Almost 4, my older daughter was in daycare that morning. She cannot remember anything different from that day. Her memory of the PJ change or the hair clip is lacking, hence my estimate is she was changed during that morning, but I'm not sure exactly. My 45-minute trip to work makes stopping for lunch very impractical. My sister has not observed anything unusual. She has been gracious enough to leave work and drive past several times here and there. At the front door is a Ring camera. I have the app on my phone with alerts enabled. Not yet, nothing exists. I'm merely the least tech-savvy person, hence I would be open to suggestions for more covert surveillance, worried another camera will be easy to find. Edit. We indeed routinely test our carbon monoxide detectors. One of the hair clips might have originated from a daycare. Although I could see the hair clip as a possibility, less plausible with the onesie. If either of my younger daughters had returned with something like that before, I would have noticed, especially since it was the kind of onesie I detest with a passion, LOL. She hadn't been to daycare in days. People say they are eager to know how this story ends. The Hollywood horror ending is my financial one. Hopefully, I dreamed about the dogs too so I could at last quit gathering their imagined shits and things. Update 2, I knew I was nowhere with the accusations and half-baked guesses after almost losing my head over a hair clip and a onesie. I wasn't sleeping, eating or taking care of myself the way I should have been since I was so consumed in the paranoia and suffering of my circumstances and I wasn't getting any answers. I thus decided to activate the hidden cameras and have them sent to my sister's house. My brother-in-law agreed to assist with the install/setup at my place. Still, I got my much-needed validation before the cameras were ever delivered. Last week, while I was at work, a Ring alert let me know the motion at the front door. Half expecting to see a delivery person, pet or lawn care salesman for the 15th time, you may picture my astonishment when I watched a footage of a young woman leading my daughter into the house hand in hand with my husband and our other daughter close by. My spouse was at work. The girls were meant to be in childcare. From what I knew, the wife was residing 2 states away under court order keeping her there. I asked my husband straight away what this woman was doing in our house. He ignored me, so I texted him. Knowing I had received the Ring alert, he most likely understood he had messed up by entering the front door and sought to postpone the unavoidable. He was foolish too. But after the 5th or 6th call he at last answered. As I would subsequently learn, the woman on the camera was my husband's sister. She most certainly supplied the bow, the onesie, and the tampons. She is also a recovered addict who spent the better part of her childhood and young adulthood pressuring the silence of another one of my husband's family members following her molestation. She is also a registered sex offender. Years had passed without seeing or hearing from her, and from the way my husband spoke about her, I never expected I would ever would. But here she was, in our house surrounded by our kids. Let me say, I was enraged. Though it was hardly an affair at all, knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening made it much more repulsive. My husband was particularly high on the list since my sister-in-law, fresh out of another stay in recovery, had wanted to rebuild relationships with those she had harmed. My husband had been meeting in secret, usually at our house while I was at work, not wanting me to know, or worse, keep her away from our family and children. They would come in via the garage in my husband's car so the Ring camera at the front entrance wouldn't alert me. She had even stayed in our bed overnight on a weekend when I had gone on a business trip. On a night my husband told me he dropped off our daughters, she watched over them. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow, the identical ones my husband had promised in his life that I had dressed her in myself. My spouse insisted this was all in my head, the tampons, the one piece, the bow, everything else. Shrugging aside each increasingly disturbing revelation like it was news to him and telling me I was being unreasonable, he was quite happy to see me suffer for weeks over a lady he maintained did not exist. 2 years after I had given birth to a child, 4 years after I had told him one of my main worries about parenthood was PPD like my mother had experienced with me. I worried about not being totally present for our children and about having shame and remorse all around as they got older. He advised me to get back off and reassess my mental health. I missed the girls too much and wasn't sleeping enough. Since he was my spouse and since no other way of events made sense, I gave him the benefit of the doubts. After a month of this mental game, I have nothing to show for my trust except this miserable state and a great deal of resentment. Call the cops and a lawyer, comments 1. Reaction. Already on it. We are, believe me, walking burnt ground with this. Now to the next story, story 2. Am I the asshole for asking my son to stop wearing his favorite jacket because it looks gay? Original post. I'm a single dad to my son, Oliver 10M. He's with me most of the time, and sees his mum every other weekend. He's an awesome kid, creative, full of energy, and he's got his own sense of style that's pretty unique. He loves bright colors, nail polish, and clothes that some people might think are more girly. If I'm honest, I think Oliver might be gay, and I'm totally cool with that. I've always made it clear that whoever he turns out to be, I'll support him 100%. Because of how he dresses and acts, Oliver's had a really tough time with other kids. He got bullied so badly at his old school that I ended up pulling him out and homeschooling him. The school wasn't helpful at all, and it was heartbreaking to see him go through that. He's struggled to make friends, and it kills me to see him feel so alone. Now, he's starting back at school in September, and he's really excited about it. But recently, we were at a cousin's birthday party, and Oliver wore his favorite jacket, which is a bright pink, sparkly one that he loves. Some of the other kids started picking on him, saying he looked gay. I stepped in, got the kids to apologize, but it ruined the day for Oliver. I'm worried about how things will go when he's back at school. I've been thinking about whether I should talk to Oliver about maybe toning it down a bit, especially when he's around new people. Not because I want him to change who he is, but because I hate seeing him get hurt and feel like an outcast. I don't want him to feel like he has to hide who he is, but I also don't want him to be picked on or excluded because of it. But then, I feel like a complete arsehole for even thinking about this. I don't want him to think that I'm ashamed of him or that he has to conform to be accepted. I want him to feel free to be himself, but I'm also scared of him being hurt by others who don't get it. So, would I be the asshole if I talked to Oliver about maybe being a bit more low-key with his style? Comments, from all 3 posts. Commenter, don't do it. Kids will still bully him and all he will remember is that you deterred him from expressing himself. Trust me, the same thing occurred in our house. I was trying to keep him from being bullied, but my child felt as though I didn't accept him and that he needed to pretend he was something he wasn't. Lots of later life therapy. If he's gay, if he's straight, let him be himself and tell him as long as he likes his clothes, that's all that matters. Sincerely, the mom of an amazing queer kid. OOP. I get that, but at the same time it is so heartbreaking seeing the same thing happen to him over, and over, and over again. Commenter, Jesus, where do you live? Most kids don't care about this kind of thing these days. OOP, I live in the West Midlands of England. I honestly don't think your point about most kids not caring is at all accurate. I see it every day. Commenter. Do not dull his shine because other people don't understand him. I understand it may be coming from a place of protection, but it needs to be addressed with the potential aggressors, not with forcing your son to change who he is. OOP, but when you can't do anything more with potential aggressors. I have done, and will continue to do everything I can. But sadly I can't literally watch his back 24/7, even though I would if I could. Anytime he has a comment made to him he breaks his little heart and it is so devastating seeing him go through that again and update. Hey all, it's been about 26 days since my original post, and I thought I'd give an update now that Oliver has had his first week back at school. I can happily say that so far, things are going much better than I'd hoped. Over the summer, Oliver and I had a really important heart-to-heart. I sat him down and told him just how incredibly proud I am of the person he is becoming. I made sure he knew that there is absolutely nothing he could ever do that would change the way I see him or make me love him any less. Honestly, it was a bit emotional, and I even got a bit choked up. I told him that if wearing his favorite jacket, the one that's caused some hurt before, made him happy, I'd stand behind him 100%. But I also wanted to make sure he was prepared. I explained that, while I'll always be there for him, I can't always be around to protect him. And he might have to stand up for himself if kids make fun of him. I made it clear that this doesn't mean he should change anything about who he is, but that he needs to be ready to handle it if anyone says anything cruel. Oliver understood, and we spent the summer coming up with some playful comebacks together. He really wanted to take the jacket with him to school, so we made it a bit of a project, imagining the kind of things kids might say and crafting witty replies that he could fire back with. It was actually pretty fun, and I think it helped him feel more confident about it. Now back to school. His new teacher knows all about his past struggles with bullying, and she's been amazing. She's keeping a close eye on things and making sure he feels safe and comfortable. It's made such a difference already, and Oliver's first week couldn't have gone better. He's even made a friend, a boy named Sam, and they've really hit it off. They're planning to meet up tomorrow at the wacky warehouse, and Oliver can't stop talking about it. It's been a long time since I've seen him this excited about spending time with someone his age. I know it's still early days, but seeing him come home happy and smiling each day has been such a relief. Thanks to everyone who gave advice and encouragement on my original post. I really took a lot of it to heart, and I think it made a big difference in how I approached all this. Update 2. Hey, I just wanted to hop on and give a small update about Oliver's playdate over the weekend. Firstly, when Oliver was getting ready, he wanted to wear all his flamboyant clothes. He asked me if I thought it was a good idea. His friend had seen him in his jacket, but he was a little worried how he would react to the full Oliver. I told him to wear whatever he wanted, and if this friend was worth being friends with, they would accept him for exactly how he is. This made Oliver smile. He wore his full Oliver outfit. When we were walking in, I could feel Oliver getting a bit nervous. He was bullied so much in his last school for how he was, so I understood why. I held his hand tight and gave it 2 squeezes. This means I love you, something I learned to teach him from Reddit actually. The friend's dad was with him and he looked at Oliver and gave a little curious look, but apart from that it was fine. The boy said he loved Oliver's clothes. They spent about 4 hours playing, and we ended up eating together. On the way home, I told Oliver how proud I am of the little man he is. I am so proud of how he is so willing to be himself, and so brave to continue despite any backlash he gets. I love him so much. This is my final update on this account. I don't know if I'll ever show you these posts, Oliver. Maybe in a few years when you're older, so we can laugh at how worried I was about you. Your dad is so proud of you. I think you are the most amazing person in the whole world. Even when you drive me absolutely nuts. I am so lucky to get to be your father. I am so lucky you are in my life. I love you. My fiancé asked for an open relationship just weeks before our wedding. Am I the asshole for canceling the wedding? We were less than 2 weeks away from getting married when she asked me to accompany her to therapy. She was already seeing a therapist on her own and asked me to join her for a conversation before the wedding so we could be entirely honest with each other. That sounded unusual to me. I assumed we were already entirely honest with one another. After all, we were getting married in 2 weeks, right? She was also quite protective of her therapy sessions and did not discuss them openly. I'd never met her therapist, so being welcomed there felt out of place. The day came, and I attended the session. To protect myself, I kept my phone open and recorded audio. My fiancé had already arrived and I had to wait 20 minutes before being let inside. The therapist greeted me, shook my hand, and we exchanged light talk. She informed me I wasn't as my fiancé had portrayed me. I assumed she was attempting to congratulate me. The therapist then turned to my fiancé and told her, "This may be more difficult than we anticipated." That freaked me out. But I remained calm, smiled politely, and did not respond. The therapist gave a brief speech that I do not like to repeat. As the therapist began emphasizing that we live in a modern world, my fiancée grasped my hand and expressed her desire for us to have a non-traditional marriage in the future. I grinned, not quite knowing what that meant. I assumed she was referring to seeking an equal partnership in which she would not be expected to give up her job or independence, a current girl power message. But it was something else entirely. She was talking about wanting to be able to sleep with other men once we married. I was stunned. It's 2018, I reminded myself, but seriously. She went on to say that she deeply loved me and would not be happy with me having the same freedom since the thought of me being with other women would break her heart. She couldn't take the idea of someone else stealing me from her. I allowed them to finish chatting. They both appeared to gain confidence, most likely as a result of my silence. It felt like they had practiced this. After they were finished, I asked the therapist if she was licensed. Her reply indicated that she had not expected that to be my first question. She agreed, so I instructed her to explain to my fiancé why we would not be marrying and would no longer be a couple, effective immediately. I wished them both luck and exited the office. I'm considering reporting to the therapist. I'm not sure whether I should report her to the clinic or a licensing board, but I believe there was some professional misconduct and I want her to be held accountable. That session did not go well for me at all. To be clear, that conversation would never end well. Even if my fiancé had wanted an open marriage in which I could sleep with other women, I would still have called off the wedding. That is not a marriage. It is a fake. It's also occurred to me that she might have already cheated on me. Looking back, certain things do not add up, and now that I have clarity, I feel foolish. I listened to the recording again, and I still can't believe what they said. Anyway, I called the wedding off. I'm normally a laid-back guy. I avoid arguments and conflicts because I follow principles and utilize common sense. Perhaps that gave my ex the impression that I was a pushover, but she was completely mistaken. After listening to the recording a few times, I'm convinced the therapist understood I wasn't how my fiancé described me in their sessions, hence the comment, "This may be harder than we thought." Now that the wedding has been cancelled, people are starting to ask questions, and I'm not sure how to handle it. I'm sure my ex is conducting damage control, but I have the video, and if she goes too far with her version of events, I won't be afraid to tell others what she was truly proposing. My parents and family also want answers, but I'm not sure what my ex has told them. I don't want them to think I was a fool for allowing things to progress to the point where she felt comfortable enough to tell me she wanted to sleep with other guys. She has also been blowing up my phone, my best friend's phone, and my brother's phone, saying, "We can work on this." She believes she did not understand what was stated during the therapy session and is willing to do whatever to make things right. This was the therapist's suggestion. She was opposed to it, etc. The final shriek of a dying siren. Her cries fell on deaf ears, and I owned those ears. We were also working on obtaining a loan to purchase a home, but I canceled everything. I effectively severed any ties we had, monetarily or otherwise. Her present appeal is that during treatment, she revealed her worries regarding our sexual history. I had much more partners than she did, and the therapist purportedly suggested that we level the field. Regardless of the truth, I'll report that therapist as soon as I figure out where and how. This post is largely a rant, but I'd like to know how you would handle questions from friends and family. My ex is definitely conducting her own damage control, and I don't want this to become a he said she said issue. I have the recording and was wondering if I should share it with the relevant parties. My ex does not know I have the recording. Small update, I'm at work and just received confirmation that the journal has been returned to my ex. I sent it early this morning via courier from our office and she had to sign a confirmation that she received it. As several have suggested, I concluded that reading it would be ineffective because she never accepted responsibility for the incident. Update 1. Aside from the jokes, the 2 weeks after my initial post have been intriguing. Last Monday, I spoke with a lawyer at work about my problem with the therapist. At first, he assumed I was joking and inquired about the prank. I offered to play the recording for him and he accepted. The next day, we reviewed the recording together, and he pointed out stuff I hadn't observed. The therapist consistently used language such as "we think," "we want," and "we decided." She never once said, "Your ex asked me to talk with you," or "Your ex wants you to know." It was always either "we this" or "we that." The lawyer inquired as to my ultimate goal, whether I intended to file a lawsuit. I informed him I wasn't going to sue, but I wanted to report the therapist to the relevant authorities. We decided to write 2 letters, one to the clinic where the therapist works and another to the American Psychological Association, APA, which validated her accreditation. By Wednesday, a few more people at work had become aware of the problem, including one of the case researchers. She looked up information about the therapist, including internet ratings and contact information for 2 of her prior clients. The therapist did not have the best reviews. Several people were furious with her, and we were able to reach 2 of them via social media. When we described the scenario, they were eager to assist. Their stories were not any better than mine. The letters expanded in length as we included signed reports from the other 2 people, as well as my personal explanation of how my ex changed after starting therapy and a thorough account of my session with the doctor. Last Friday, I met with my ex's parents. They arrived at my parents' place and we had a conversation. My ex was also present and further material was revealed, which was then included in the report on the therapist. This week, reports were sent out and the clinic responded. They called our office Thursday morning, most likely to see if the allegation was legitimate. We spoke with one of their lawyers over the phone, and after we determined it was serious, someone on the other end was heard saying, "Well, crap." They stated that they were treating the situation extremely seriously. One of my coworkers noted that the clinic had received prior complaints, but never one this well documented, which could explain their prompt response. Their letter also stated that they were notifying the APA, which could have additional pressure. I'm not sure what will happen, but I consider my problem to be resolved. However, after speaking with the other two former patients, I strongly hope that the therapist will be probed. She sounds insane and certainly has a plan. She also wrecked their relationships, of whom one was a woman. Finally, my ex and her parents. My folks contacted last Friday and invited me to visit after work. When I arrived, I was surprised to see both my ex and her parents there. My initial thought was to go. This meeting was meant to be on my terms, but it appeared that she was attempting to control the situation. Let me tell you, it was not going to happen. My ex waited for me outside. She looked great. If there was ever a girl you wanted your parents to meet, she was it. She informed me that they were coming to speak with me and see if we could resolve this. They did not refer to her parents. Either she never informed them what happened, or she told them a version of the story that they did not believe. She had a journal with her and stated that she began writing in it before treatment and continued until Friday morning. She said I should read it since it will clear up all the uncertainty. I informed her it wasn't a book club. I wanted to go inside and start the chat, but she requested for 10 minutes to talk before meeting with her parents. She continued handing me her journal and began crying. Then my sister arrived, followed by my ex's sister. They had been there all along and came out to check on us. So I took the diary, walked inside, said hello to everyone and then left my ex in the back of the garden, in the most remote part of my parents' yard. They have a spacious garden with plenty of trees and benches. She left her job owing to the stress, which resulted in a breakdown that never improved. She was no longer visiting her therapist. Initially, she began treatment for work-related issues, but it gradually turned to focus on our relationship, which appeared to be the only thing the therapist was interested in. She never explained to her folks why she became my ex. Now she was seeing a different therapist. I just listened. She shifted the subject to us, informing me that I would be in charge. I'd handle the funds, have access to all of her devices, and be able to track her activities. Any property we owned would be in my name, and she would do everything I asked to win my trust. She basically reaffirmed what she had been expressing in her messages throughout the previous weeks. She listed far more items than I can recall. I'm not sure how she believed this was a healthy way for either of us to live. I asked if she had cheated. She told me that she had the opportunity to cheat but never did. I believed her, but it made me angry. What exactly did she mean by opportunity? If you are in a committed relationship, you do not place yourself in a position where infidelity is even a possibility. You do not want the opportunity. It's similar to stating, I had the opportunity to kill someone today. Why? What were you doing that resulted in such an opportunity? And why term it an opportunity, as if it were something good? That pretty much concluded our 10 minutes. I told her we should go talk to our parents, and we did. I requested our sisters to leave us alone since what we were about to discuss was not their concern. My sister huffed and puffed, but a stone home can withstand hurricanes, and she wasn't one. I detailed what happened. How the therapy session went and what I decided. I didn't say I had a recording since I didn't have to. My ex corroborated everything I had said, which astonished me. Her father had teary eyes, which shattered my heart. Her mother inquired if this was how she felt they had raised her and requested an explanation. My ex basically told them the same story. Work-related stress, depression, a breakdown, therapy focusing solely on our relationship. The therapist convincing her that our relationship was the source of all her stress, that she needed an open relationship to avoid losing me, and that she needed to level her sexual experience with mine. She said my reply jolted her out of her slump. She has quit her job and is seeking something less demanding. She'll do anything to get me back. My ex referenced the diary again, saying that if I read it, it would explain everything, and that while she disagreed with the therapist's opinions, she went along with them since the therapist was an authoritative figure with experience. Our parents glanced at me and I said, "Someone's private journal is not the type of literature I read, unless they're a dead poet." A big mistake. My purpose was to convey that private journals only become literature when written by a writer or a leader, and that they are typically published after the author's death. I was also hoping they'd get the message that I didn't want to read her notebook since it wouldn't change anything. What had been done was done. Everyone looked at me as if I had wished death on my ex. You could sense the animosity in the air, so I gave in and muttered, "Fine, fine," promising to read the journal. You win some, you lose some, and then you use the incorrect words, resulting in even more losses. My ex is currently seeing a new therapist. She showed her parents the confirmation emails for her appointments. He's an older man with a white beard, much like Freud. I searched him up online. He is married, attends conferences and has written a couple books that are accessible on Amazon. Seems like a solid character. Then her parents said, "Can't you kids work this out?" That was the second thing that made me angry that day. As if this were child's play, and we should just listen to the adults since we were too young to control our emotions or judge what constitutes an irreversible betrayal. We were just kids who needed to work things out. So I reclaimed some ground after my earlier remark about the Dead Poets Society, and that was how the day concluded. We've known each other for 9 years and been in a relationship for 5. Even if there are real causes for her behavior, how can you return to normalcy? This was not even a reset. My perspective on my ex has shifted dramatically. She has become a stranger to me. Yes, I still find her appealing. Very attractive. There's no disputing how great she looked last Friday. But it was also calculated, I won't lie. Her hair was styled the way I like it, and she wore a dress I got for her as well as the shoes I prefer the most. I could even detect a bit of the perfume I had given her. The journal is on my nightstand. I have not read it and I doubt I ever will. I looked through it to see if it was actually a year old, and it is. As you work your way through the entries, you can see how the pages are folded and how the ink has aged. The pen she used was attached to the journal. When I examined it, it matched the ink, and the ink level appeared to be consistent with a year of use. It's not a forgery. Everything about it is compatible with a year of wear and tear. I don't see how reading it would help. It feels like a tool for playing with my psyche. Not really. I don't think she started writing it a year ago with the intention of using it for manipulation. If what she told me is true, her new therapist advised she share the journal with me. When people ask why the wedding is off, I tell them, we had a huge difference of opinion that we couldn't resolve. More or less. But if her sister discovers the true reason, which is likely given her tight relationship with their mother, everyone will find out soon enough. Our parents want us to meet again next week. They told me to read the journal, which might assist. Given our extensive history, perhaps we can work on it and start over. They believe she will receive therapy, recover and remain the lady I fell in love with, just not right now. They can see I still adore her. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so theatrical. I don't think I'll meet them next Friday, but she did look stunning. I'd like to thank the community for their support and assistance. It's been enough to help me develop a strategy for dealing with the therapist. Thank you to everyone who shared resources and information about what to do next. What do I do with her journal? Return it, keep it, or read it 90 years from now? Update 2. The therapist no longer works at the facility. The clinic's lawsuit is most likely the primary motivator for this decision. Someone unrelated to my case has sued them. I don't have any other information. The therapist attempted to reach me but was unsuccessful. I believe she learned about my report on her and requested more information, but who knows? I didn't interact with her. She was blocked and her questions remained unanswered. A faint voice in the back of my head suggests that filing that report may not have been the best move. It could attract unwelcome attention, and the persons behind the lawsuit could approach me for assistance. Despite this, I can't keep a satisfied grin off my face, knowing that the therapist is in trouble. To those who have questioned whether I have emotions, if this isn't proof enough, I'm not sure what would. And I hope you understand sarcasm. Mela, on the other hand, complicates matters considerably. I added a brief update to my previous post concerning her journal. I decided to return it, and I was quite clinical in my approach. On Monday morning, the courier we use at work handed the journal to her. I attached a note explaining why I had not read it. Everything came down to her refusal to accept responsibility for the situation. By giving me the journal, I felt she was washing her hands of the situation, putting the duty of finding solutions on my shoulders. In return, I washed my hands of it. To be honest, I felt a pang of sadness the moment they told me the journal had been returned. Perhaps I should have read it. Later that day, Mela arrived at my workplace. She didn't cause a scene, nothing like that. She waited patiently in the lobby. Her goal was to wait until I ended my workday and then talk to me. Naturally, I discovered she was present quite quickly. My options were to send her away or talk to her. So we talked. Several architects planned the end of our relationship. 1. Stress. This was something I was aware of, but I had never recognized how serious it was. In retrospect, when she began seeking for a therapist to help with work stress, I should have been more conscious of the issue. But she always said everything was all right, so why shouldn't I believe her? Whether she was seeing a therapist or not, she had a breakdown at work that she kept hidden from me and her family. 2. Miscarriage. I may have become a father. She miscarried. She told me she was a few weeks pregnant and wanted to make it special. However, a few days later, she began bleeding and that was it. She never told me about it because she was worried I would think she was unworthy. She knows how badly I want to be a father, and she assumed this would lead me to believe she couldn't bear children. This idea is completely ludicrous. 3. Friends. I made it clear in the comments that we had friends in open relationships. One such acquaintance phoned Mela over a year ago and invited her to lunch. She quickly began venting her feelings over her broken marriage onto Mela. Her husband, like me, had far more lovers than she did. In my situation, there were 26 previous partners, her husband had 70. He demanded an open relationship from the day they married, and she has been miserable ever since. Apparently, Mela would face the same fate if she did not take care of me. This friend informed Mela that I exhibited the same symptoms as her husband before they married. 4. Family secrets. Those we love are not always who we believe they are. Our fathers work in academia and have known each other for 30 to 35 years. They routinely go to work-related gatherings and parties, usually with their wives. I met Mela at one such occasion. I went with my father to meet a professor who could aid me with my career. Mela was there instead of her mother, who had a scheduling conflict, or so she was told. Her parents were having a difficult time as a result of her father's infidelity. Mela just learned about this recently, when she discussed the concerns raised by the previously mentioned friend with her mother. This was a great shock for her. Her parents always appeared to be the ideal couple, a role model. They certainly patched things up and maintained the appearance of a wonderful marriage throughout. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse combined with a therapist with questionable objectives, and that's how you end a relationship. The therapist was excited to plan my open relationship and validated what my friend had said. Men like me would never be pleased with only one woman. I would eventually seek more, and the only way to cure my cheating impulses was for Mela to sleep with other men until we evened out the numbers. Of course, I would be opposed to it, but that was okay. If I loved Mela, I could understand. This was a multi-layered concept. It would not only cure my alleged cheating conduct, but it would also affirm my love for her and enhance our bond. Naturally, this approach would have failed, and I believe that is precisely what the therapist was going for. Our relationship would not have survived. What the therapist did not foresee was how quickly I would react, or so I believe now. Mela and I met every day for the rest of the week, and she answered every question I asked her. One thing was clear, she was willing to fight for our relationship, whereas I was ready to leave things. At the end of the week, I had to depart for another city for work. The trip was intended to be 2 weeks, but it was extended to 4 weeks, more billable hours, Before leaving, I gave Mela a copy of the therapy session tape. She knew I had it. It was one of the first things I discussed with her when she arrived at my employment on Monday. Listening to the recording rattled her to her core. What she remembered about the treatment session differed significantly from what was on the recording. I believe she finally understood where all of my acts and conduct towards her originated from. During those 3 weeks, I had little interference from anyone and was left to my own devices. It was wonderful. Several individuals in the comments offered me a beer if I ever visited their city, and I accepted. It was my first time meeting another Redditor, and surprise, he was not a weirdo. He and his wife were excellent individuals. Mela paid a visit in the 4th week. We had been in communication for the preceding 3 weeks, discussing a variety of things, most of which were about us. One important concern was finalizing our honeymoon plans. We were meant to go to France for 2 weeks following the wedding, but neither of us could go right away, so it was scheduled for 3 months later, and it was quickly approaching. We already had non-refundable travel tickets and hotel reservations, but we no longer had us. That fourth week, we chatted more and decided to go to France as friends. I can already imagine eyes rolling. But France was incredible. Visiting a place like that reminds you that the United States is medieval in comparison. Americans are easily identifiable in museums. To be honest, learning how to act in foreign nations should be required in our schools. We returned from France as a couple again. It wasn't due to the magic of Paris though. We're not back to our previous selves yet and there's more work to be done. Several points we agreed on, in no particular order. 1. Mela is seeking for a new work that is less stressful. 2. Our friends in open marriages have been branded a toxic influence, and we will no longer socialize with them. 3. We both like the name Mela, and it will be used for our first daughter, thank you France. 4. Never hide anything from your partner, such as a miscarriage. I'm quite upset about this one. 5. We'll acquire a dog and a cat. 6. Mela will keep seeing her current therapist for a time. 7. When we do marry, it will be a simple wedding with only our immediate family. 8. We'll probably visit Italy next. I suppose this is not the thrilling update everyone was hoping for. Many of you requested an update, and if you were hoping for rage, hatred or revenge, I'm sure there is a version of this story in which those things are feasible. But as I've stated from the start, I didn't detest Mela. My actions were based on self-preservation at the moment. Her behaviors indicated that she wanted something other than what I believed we both agreed on. There is no reason to be concerned about her mental state. When her therapist's impact faded, she returned to her previous self, more or less. These events have unavoidably altered her, but she is now in a better state. You'll recall that she promised me control over her finances, tracking her location and full access to all of her devices. Aside from my disinterest in such a lifestyle, those were simply attempts to continue the conversation. We agree to be open with our devices, but we have always been, so nothing has changed there. We will continue to share our finances, as we have always done. Thank you to everyone who left comments and sent me private messages. Some of the advice I received was invaluable, and I'm eternally thankful. Writing these pieces and interacting with you all has been quite therapeutic, a great way to relieve stress. Dad planned to marry his young girlfriend just weeks after my mom's death, threatening to kick me out. Am I the asshole for ruining his wedding? My father has always mistreated me badly. He was obviously not interested in being a dad from a very young age, but I never could find out which he disliked more, being married to my mother or father to me. Given that he treated my mother no better than he treated me, I believe he must have loathed it equally. I lost my mother only 4 weeks back. I turned 17 some months ago. It was not surprising. She had been battling lung cancer for some time and at last passed away in a hospital. 3 years ago she was diagnosed. Since then, it felt like I had been holding my breath. I believe I at last let it all go when Mom died. She was my friend, thus even now it feels quite strange to be without her around. She was most crucially the only person there to guard me from my father. Every single day in the house where I grew up, my parents would argue over something or another. They obviously did not love one another, and I really have no idea why they were married. My mother would tell me that they had loved each other at some time every time I asked her why she had married him. They would always make up, but I never could forgive my father as fast as my mother did. She had been urged to leave him several times as occasionally he would say extremely terrible things to her during a quarrel. He would say things like how he wishes she died from her illness so he could go on with his life and how he regretfully ever was with her and had a child with her. She just resisted when I advised her to go several times. I'm not sure why. Regarding myself, I had wanted to go from the age of 4 years old but had nowhere else to go and no other relatives either. Raised by her grandmother, who passed away while she was in college, my mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was small. She contacted no other family members, hence I knew nothing about my father's side of the family as he never took us to see them. He claimed not wanting us to see his family since he did not get along with them. There was no elaboration, and I asked him too, afraid. I was used to being screamed at for stuff, hence I wasn't going to paint a bullseye on myself by prying into anything like that. I had to deal with my father since, all told, my parents were the only family I had. My mother refused to go. I was heartbroken when she died, but my dad carried on as though nothing had happened. It was not shocking to me in the least since he had been acting the same way even when she was unwell. Knowing he did not love anyone, I did not expect him to be sensitive. He most likely lacked even that ability. What truly startled me though, was that my dad brought home a considerably younger woman once we were finished with the funeral and paperwork 2 weeks after my mother died. She was simply here one morning drinking coffee in our living room. My father told me she was my new mother when I plucked the bravery to ask her who she was. When he was telling me that, he apparently also had the largest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet. Against my will, I found myself remarking on it. Since it had only been 2 weeks since my mother died, I told him it was a little too soon to bring his girlfriend home. That brought me to a lecture from him on how this would be my stepmother in a few days and on the need of respecting her. He told me he didn't care that I had just lost my mother. I had to treat her the same way I had treated my own mother. He dropped another bombshell on me and informed me he was getting married as I was over myself with rage trying to argue with him. Ever since her diagnosis, he claimed, he had known that she would not be able to make it as she had always been delicate and frail ever since he had known her. He had thus begun searching for substitutes. That is exactly the word he used. For the past 2 years he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend. Now that my mother was at last out of the way, he told me he was planning to be married once more and ensure her death had no impact on his life at all. It at once made sense why he had been untouched by my mother's illness and death thus far. He had replaced her. I honestly just turned away from him because I was disgusted. I told him I would not be attending the wedding, and expected him to say he was good with it since, really, why would he care? Then he informed me I had to go, which caught me off guard. He informed me he could only make this look regular and acceptable to other people if I attended, so explaining why it was. He seemed to be saying that by showing up for the wedding, I would have accepted it and that since his own daughter had not objected to this marriage, nobody else would have any cause to remark on it either. Basically, he required me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in and of itself was really crazy. To be honest, my father seemed insane. Besides saying such strange and pointless things, he was getting married 2 weeks after his wife died without thinking about what other people would say. Not only that, the woman marrying him was only 25 at most, a few years older than I am. Her actual age is unknown, however she cannot be older than that. My dad falls in late 40s. This man, who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be in mourning right now, is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to act like this is all normal and that she supports it. It is eerie enough. He definitely belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. It's a complete formula for catastrophe. I told him there was no way I could be at this wedding when he informed me he was marrying Melissa. He was free to become offended at that as desired. Then he informed me he would not only be offended but also kicked me out should I miss a meeting. He would also ensure that I never got access to the college fund my mother and he had been saving for me ever since my birth. Since, as he had stated, my mom's money had gone into the education fund as well as his, so I considered it to be essentially unjust. Although I think I was entitled to it, sadly I couldn't make him turn over the money to me as it is not required by law. There were no records to support it, hence it was not as if he had set it aside especially for that purpose. Basically, I would be tossed out and would not have any chances of attending college either if I skipped that wedding. On one hand, I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this craziness in any kind whatsoever, thus I was in a quite tough situation. However, I also had to look out for myself as I had a few months left before I left for college and I couldn't afford to lose money since I had none of my own. My mother's will takes some time to process, hence I would only obtain the inheritance only then. For now, it seemed as though my only choice was to show up for the wedding and present myself as helping my father. Last week I was informed about the wedding, but I just couldn't get myself to welcome it. I thus resolved that I had to go all out to prevent this from occurring. Or at least try to intervene. I told my father I would be at the wedding, but then I started searching for something, anything, to throw off the proceedings since I just couldn't bring myself to let this happen. I just wanted something. I really had no idea what I was looking for. When my father left his laptop alone, I got quite lucky, miraculously lucky. A few days back, he and Melissa went out to celebrate their marriage by dinner. I was alone at home. Leaving his laptop on the coffee table, my dad had since it was locked. I expected nothing when I opened it, therefore I just tried to guess the password. Fortunately, I got everything just perfect. Melissa's name came first, then his own birthday, which was strangely startling. Still, once I arrived, I could hardly believe it. I first found nothing when I started browsing his social media. Then I saw he had 2 Facebook profiles, and I chose to review the second one, which I had not seen before. Surprising me was his hidden account set up for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me he did not get along with his family, but here he was on his other page hanging out with individuals we had never seen before who seemed to be certainly linked to him. As I searched, additional pictures from years past turned up. He obviously has been in contact with his family all along. He had simply been fooling us. I then chose to review his communications on that account and discovered that he had been in contact with his parents for really a lengthy period. I guess he also carried another phone. From the start, he had been living essentially two lives, and nobody knew. Although my mother had known about some of this, she had never shared anything with me. Neither had my mother. I was rather sure his family knew nothing about me whatsoever. Following his talks with his father on his account, I discovered that his father believed he was living away from home for business only, nothing else. He had a full family here, little knowing of it. I snapped brief pictures of those conversations and turned to my own phone to talk to my grandfather. Given all of this was so absurd, I was really anxious about whether he would even believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. Still, I went to my room and signed in using my own Facebook account. I got in touch with the profile I saw on my dad's page. As I had predicted, there had been no mutual friends. So I had never been able to locate him. I had never been able to track these people as I hadn't even known my grandfather's true name for all these years. Having his account now, I messaged him straight away and tried to rapidly explain everything. This was an emergency, hence I provided him my phone number and advised him to get in touch as soon as he could. I included additional pictures of the screenshots I'd taken, outlining how I had tracked his profile. I also sent some pictures of me with my parents so he would know this was not a hoax directed on him. After not hearing anything for the following 12 hours, I nearly gave up hope. Maybe he had chosen not to react since he felt someone was pulling a practical joke on him. But I eventually got a call from my granddad when Dad was at work. I was simply lucky that he had phoned me before that and had not mentioned this to my father. Anyway, I answered my phone and told him what was happening as soon as he called. For the past 17 years, he informed me, he had been made to believe that my father was working elsewhere, that is, away from Iowa, where he was originally from. Apparently, my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had lived whenever they paid him visits. He had also visited his son several times. About none of this, they had the least of knowledge. They had spent the last 12 hours trying to get over the shock of it all. At first this all seemed to them as a joke, but they came to recognize it was real when they viewed my mother in the family pictures I had emailed. Apparently, my father had told his parents he had broken up with my mother, so he had never told them about his marriage and the family he had. They disapproved of her 18 years ago, when my parents first began dating. He had informed my grandparents he had dumped her as they were quite clear they did not want my father to marry my mother. For the past 2 decades, it was the fiction he had been selling. Now he had at last been caught. My grandparents had not wanted my father to wed my mother for really serious reasons. It was because they accused my mother of being a gold digger and she had reportedly been trying to cheat on him. This was due in part to the first time my father had brought my mother home to see his parents. She had instantly targeted his older brother, a surgeon who clearly made more than my father. My uncle's refusal to keep his lips shut over something so significant led my grandparents to learn about it. My father had been asked to split up with my mother, but he had turned down their proposal. I believe it was because of me since, based on my calculations, my mother most likely already was pregnant by then. My parents were given an ultimatum. Either they would cut him off from their life or he would split up with my mother. They understood she was only with him for the money, hence cutting him off would drive my mother to leave him. Eventually, my dad told them he had split things off with my mother, although obviously he had not as they remained together. And this is the reason I'm here. If my mother had really done such things, I wonder why they stayed together. This fundamentally altered my view of both my parents. Once I knew these things though, I told my grandparents how badly I was being treated and that I had nowhere else to rely on. But I was depending on them now that I knew they existed and wasn't as alone as I had first thought. I still would understand if they turned away from me. Thank goodness they decided to assist me. I was able to stop the wedding from taking place. Like his parents, I returned to my father's house also. 2 days ago they flew down here. Yesterday, I managed to slip them into the wedding. All of a sudden, we were honored guests. Our backyard was the venue for the wedding as just a small number of guests were expected to attend. It was supposed to be a modest and private ceremony. Only my father's colleagues and boss, a couple of his acquaintances, and that was it. He had obviously not invited his family. They had not even received invitations to his first marriage. But I arranged for their attendance at the second. I emailed my grandparents and informed them it was finally time for them to show up as I wanted to halt everything before the vows were taken. Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything. I slipped out right before the vows, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents for the theatrical purposes of it all. My father's face dropped and Melissa seemed fairly perplexed as soon as he saw me walking down the aisle with his parents. Once I drew close to him, I declared that his parents now knew the truth, that I had at last exposed all his falsehoods. He could bid farewell to his inheritance since all was now coming to me rather than to him. Since I already had a place to live, people looking after me, and also my college fund, I no longer needed him either. Knowing he was a liar, I did not want to be with him, so he could do anything he pleased. I then left with my grandparents, and since then we have been staying in a hotel getting ready for our trip back. Since I haven't known these folks, my grandparents need a lot of catching up. Likewise, there is plenty to discuss about my parents. We haven't returned yet mainly because this morning my father finally got in touch with my grandfather and informed him that what he did was simply not proper. He had supposedly never allowed his parents to be happy and accused them of trying to control him all his life. Saying I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anyone else, he also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that. Since Melissa is now avoiding him and the wedding was clearly called off yesterday itself, immediately after we left, he is blaming all of us. I am therefore good with showing up for his second wedding with his parents and exposing him for lying. Update 1, the wedding call-off was 4 days ago. I decided not to answer my father. He does not deserve it. My grandparents agreed as well. He knows where to find us should he wish to communicate with us. We still occupy the hotel. We have provided him with the specifics. If he would want to talk with us, he could come see us and then we could have a personal conversation. But the kind of conversation we wish to conduct over the phone or via text is not this one. He still hasn't turned up yet and just 3 days remain before I return to Iowa with my grandparents. They have a farm there, they're really wealthy, and I will be taken care of considerably better than I was here. They assured me that they would see to it that I could attend the college of my choosing and that I wouldn't have to suffer following this. Since we first met, my grandparents have been almost pampering me. I believe they are attempting to make up for lost time, which is rather lovely of them. Though they seem to love me a lot, they loathe my mother and subsequently my father as well. Update 2. My grandparents and I are meant to be leaving in 2 days. My father decided this morning to at last pay us a visit and speak with us. When they contacted me this morning, I was really taken aback to see him in my grandparents' hotel room, but I immediately recovered and vowed not to talk to him the whole time until he apologized. Clearly though, given someone like him, that is too much to demand. He was here just to discuss how unfair it was that my grandparents had opted to cut him off from their life and hand me all the wealth instead. He claimed to have already lost Melissa, my mother, and his wife as well. Things were already really terrible for him since I also wanted no more contact with him. To top it all, his close friends and colleagues, all the attendees of the wedding, are now acting strange with him. What transpired at the wedding has damaged his reputation. Hence he is thinking of leaving his employment. He believes he cannot operate in such a hostile environment. To put it plainly, he had kind of lost all he owned till a few days earlier. Then we showed him at the wedding, exposed him, and wrecked everything for him. The least we could do was let him inherit, something he had been striving for years. Otherwise, he would not have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. He started lying since he merely wanted everyone to be happy. After marrying my mother, he said he had intended to tell his parents the truth, but as time went on it became more embarrassing to bring up. He had to keep up his lies and arrange a complex double life. Since everyone, including his parents, was against his happiness, he asserted he was the victim. Now, knowing I would be taken care of anyway, he came here to claim what he felt due to him, the legacy. From the start, he had been hoping and fighting for this. It would be unfair to deny it for such a minor cause. The way he was behaving as the victim infuriated me already. I lost it totally when he declared he deserved the fortune. I screamed out at him before my grandparents could say anything, "If you really deserve that inheritance, then I also deserve to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. He had never shown me any love, affection, or even the smallest of respect. 2 weeks after I lost my mother, he had genuinely threatened to kick me out and use my education fund for his own expenses if I opposed his marriage to his young girlfriend. It was only fair his parents took away anything he thought he deserved since he could not give me anything I deserved. My behavior startled him since I had never before stood up to him like that. But now, thanks to my grandparents, I no longer felt terrified of him. Usually when I was younger, this worked to shut me down. He tried to glare at me, but this time I wasn't going to be silent. Earlier, I would do that since I knew my mother wouldn't leave, probably for the same reason my father didn't cut off relations with his parents, money. Which upon her death, was ultimately futile. Her only advantage from living with him was passing away at a reputable hospital. My dad tried to yell at me when I refused to be quiet, but my grandparents told him it wasn't going to work anymore. My grandparents threatened to call security on him, thus after some conflict he had to leave. He wouldn't get anything unless he owned and accepted his mistakes. They were very plain. It would take a lot even then for them to pardon him. Had I chosen to keep the inheritance for myself, he would not have anything at all. Promising he would make sure we pay the price for what we had done, he fled like a toddler having a tantrum. What he believed he was doing is unknown to me. Though he most likely thought his actions would frighten us, it did not. It strengthened our conviction that, by not forgiving him, we were doing morally. He was not even remorseful, hence nothing could be forgiven. It gives me great pleasure to be leaving with my grandparents in a few days. I simply want to escape all of this. Although I will miss my buddies, it makes no difference now. Fall brings my trip to college. I just finished all of this. I graduated from high school. Update 3. Hi. So I left home 1 year ago. I haven't blogged anything for the previous few months since I have been really busy with college. I had essentially forgotten about it too. Following that battle with my dad in the hotel room, which I discussed in my last update, my grandparents and I headed off. We hardly spoke with my dad over the following 2 weeks, but I did run across a lot of members of his side of the family. I believe this family is the one I deserved all along. They all love me. Though she was too self-serving, my mother most likely attempted to love me. Ultimately, it damaged me more than it did her. My uncle assured me he would pay for my college tuition, therefore relieving me of any concern about it. That has been a great comfort. Though they had hardly known me for a few weeks, these folks had already resolved to show me all the affection I had been lacking for the past 17 years. For that, I am most grateful. A few months after moving in with my grandparents, I had to go to college, so I spent little time with them. My college is near where they reside, so on weekends I get to see them. There are no grievances regarding that. Not to apologize, but rather to remind me that I wrecked him and should feel bad. My father has tried to get in touch with me multiple times. He continues asking me to check on my grandparents to see whether he fits the inheritance. He emails and chats from several accounts but doesn't understand that being defensive won't support his cause. A sincere and honest apology would be the only thing that could assist him, yet at this time, it is too little, too late. I will simply ignore him. It is not worth it to reply to him. I lack the time or will to indulge his illusions. At last, I have the family I am due and am content with them. Right now, I'm loving my college life. So I will concentrate on the advantages in my life and attempt to forget about the past. I simply want to keep on improving personally.